Chapter 21. Blood upon the Altar. James and Emily left their tent just after sunrise. Along the way to the general's tent, they were joined by Connor and Sin. James and Emily walked side by side, as did Connor and Sin. They walked to Mikhail's tent to receive a final briefing before setting out. No one talked along the way. There was nothing to say. They knew where they were going, and what they must do. Seeing General Smith before setting out would be little more than a formality. They stopped at the entrance to Mikhail's tent. After a couple of moments, Sin called out, "General, we're here. Can we come in?" The party waited for a moment, but there was no answer, and no one emerged. Assuming him to be asleep, Sin decided to go into the tent and wake the general. Sin undid the tent flap and stepped inside. A moment later, the others heard a shriek from within the tent. Alerted and alarmed, the others dashed in to see what it could be. Once inside, they saw Sin with her hands over her mouth. Opposite her was a human skeleton wearing the general's clothes. There was a journal, an empty bottle of whiskey, an empty tin, and a piece of cardboard with a message sprawled across it. The message read, "Go west to the forest. Therein dwells a temple. Inside there is the gate of madness. Only Emily and her 4 guides can cross the threshold. Only a solar consciousness can traverse the gate without dissipating. Connor and Sin, a vampire and a nymph, they have such souls. A 3rd guide will be found on the way. A 4th will join you at the temple. You will understand my death after you have arrived. Do not reveal the contents of my journal until after your mission has succeeded. Be strong. You can do it. Mikhail Joseph Smith." James inquired in just as much shock as the others, "Whoa, is that—" Connor answered flatly, "Yes. General Smith is dead." Sin inquired, still horrified, Why is he a skeleton?" Connor answered, "That is hard to explain." James became insistent. "Try." Emily stepped forward, eyeing the journal on the table. She approached, reached out slowly, and picked it up. Sin protested. "I thought we weren't supposed to read the journal until—" Emily answered, "We're not to reveal the journal until after, by which time I will be dead and unable to read it. It may contain answers." Emily picked up the journal, opened it, and started to read it silently. Just then, Rolf Luger walked through the entrance to the tent, expecting a briefing. "Hey, Colonel Rouge is putting together the assault team for the—" "Holy shit, is that—" Emily set the journal down after reading some and turned to face Rolf, saying, "Yes, the general is dead." Rolf pondered and asked, "Why is he—" Connor spoke to clarify the situation. The general was the only member of Matic who didn't take anti-aging injections. His youth was preserved by a mystical force one might call magic. He kept a small black pill to end the incantation, so that if he so desired, when he took that pill, ending the spell, his age would have caught up to him. Rolf replied, "Damn! Wish I would have known." Connor answered, "His death at this time was necessary." Rolf protested, "Necessary?" Emily spoke. "His journal tells everything, but we're not to reveal it until after." Rolf questioned, "Till after?" Emily answered, "Only after our mission has succeeded can we reveal the general's writings." Sin inquired again, "Why?" Emily answered, "Because that was his last request." Rolf answered with a nod, "I see." Connor informed Rolf, "You may let the colonel know that we are getting underway." Rolf acknowledged this and responded, "There's a buggy with 2 fully charged batteries, all ready to go." Connor replied, "Then we will be off." Connor then turned to Emily and said, "Do we know where we are going?" Emily answered him, "You read the sign, same as the rest of us." Connor added with a doubtful expression, A dead man's cat scratches across a piece of dead wood." Sin interrupted, Emily and the General are the only two people who had the visions, up until we went through the door, Connor inquired. And? Sin continued, with the General dead, Emily is now our only visionary, so I would trust her judgment. Connor replied, Good. Sin replied in confusion, What do you mean, good? Connor replied, I am simply verifying that we are all on the same page. Sin, putting her hands on her hips, lovingly scolded her father. You know, Dad, you're a real pain in the ass sometimes. James entered the conversation saying, Look, I don't know about any of that. Right path, wrong path. That doesn't matter to me. Connor inquired, Oh, and what matters to you? James stepped a couple of feet closer to Connor before answering him. Wherever Emily goes, I'll follow. That's all I need to know. Emily looked to James, placing her left hand on his shoulder, pulling him back a foot or so, and looking at James, inquired, Anywhere? James responded with enthusiasm, You bet your ass. Emily giggled slightly, then looked to the others. Good. Then let's go. Emily walked forward, leaving the party behind at first, then turned to them and said, Oh, and I'm driving. James called out, Shotgun! James ran to catch up, followed by Connor and Sin. Connor grumbled to himself, I will never understand such impulsiveness. Sin teased him, You think too much, Pops. Sin then ran to catch up, leaving her father behind. Connor answered, I most certainly do not. Connor then started walking to catch up to the rest of the party. A specially prepared buggy was loaded up with batteries, some supplies for the road, and a few weapons of the sort of physical ammunition. Emily hopped into the driver's seat with James entering the front passenger side. Sin performed an acrobatic flip, landing straight into the rear seat, whilst her father took careful, dignified steps to enter the vehicle. Connor spoke once seated. Do we have a map, or landmark? Emily responded happily while turning on the electric motor switch, looking up to the horizon. Nah, I just know where to go. Sin piped up, looking at her father with furrowed eyebrows. No backseat driving, Dad. Connor muttered to himself. Children. James looked back to Connor as the vehicle started to move. Hey, I know you're in hell right now, surrounded by young and impulsive people. But someone of your age should know that nothing's permanent, so just deal, okay? Sin chuckled, ribbing her father with her elbow. See? Kids can teach you something. Connor inquired. Such as? James replied from the front, looking back. Stoicism. Connor replied flatly. Indeed. Sin leaned forward to the two in front, inquiring, We need road tunes. We got any music? James answered, fishing through his belt pack. I still got my CD player, but no tunes. Sin reached down to her left front pants pocket and pulled out a silk bag about the size of 2 coffee cups. It was purple with gold string to tie it together. Loosing the strings, she reached inside and pulled out a CD. Carefully removing it from the case, she handed it to James. James took the CD to put into his player, first examining it to see what it was. The writing on the CD was in Japanesian. James exclaimed, holding it up. What the heck is this? Sin exclaimed joyfully. Ninganisu! James exclaimed, What? Sin spoke excitedly some more. It translates as human chair. Making a strange face, James inquired further. What's it about? Sin spoke in a high pitch. Stories, you know? Witches, famines, plagues, interdimensional space demons escape from the cycle of reincarnation. It's like Japanesian progressive stoner doom metal. James shrugged. All right, I'll give it a try. James turned the CD player to speaker mode, and they listened to the exquisite sounds of Shinji, Kenichi, and Nobu as they made their way to a mystical forest, said to house the temple leading to the spirit world. At that very moment, the entire party became metal as fuck. They traveled in a buggy at speeds between 30 and 90, depending upon the flatness of the terrain, heading west towards the great forest, off in the incalculable distance. From their current location, the forest could not be seen. Again, the journey would be led by intuition. Back at the camp, Dr. Katz was peering off into the distance upon seeing something strange on the horizon. He went back to his tent, rummaged through several items, and eventually found a pair of binoculars. He took them up and ran back outside to see what could have appeared in the distance overnight. Adjusting the focus of the lenses, an old castle came into view. Dr. Katz mumbled to himself, "What in blazes is that?" As Dr. Katz examined the landscape and viewed the whole of the castle by scanning the whole thing, another unexpected thing came within view through the binoculars. He caught a glimpse of Jonas Black trudging across the desert sands. Dr. Katz lowered the binoculars and started walking briskly to the colonel's tent. Upon arriving just outside, he called out, "Miss Rouge, there's something you need to see." From inside the tent, Amber Rouge could be heard saying, "You have your orders. We all know what's at stake. Godspeed to you all. Dismissed." A moment later, Colonel Rouge emerged from the tent. Colonel Rouge inquired, "What has you spooked, Doctor?" Dr. Katz handed over the binoculars, replying, "Ma'am, there's something you really need to see." Dr. Katz held out the binoculars, and Colonel Rouge reached out to take them. She put them to her face and scanned the area with some guidance from the doctor. She managed to spot Jonas walking across the sands to their location. The colonel spoke in an even cadence. "Is that Mr. Black?" The doctor confirmed this, saying, "Sure is, but look further out." Colonel Rouge scanned further out, readjusting the lens focus, and after a bit of scanning, found the old castle. Seeing the castle, the colonel mused out loud. "I'm pretty sure that wasn't there yesterday." Dr. Katz confirmed, "No, it most certainly was not. Several scouts checked that area, and none of them reported a castle to me." Colonel Rouge followed that, nor did anyone alert me. The colonel thought for a moment, then suggested a course of action. "Well, he can't be more than an hour or so away. How about we grab some water and go out to meet him?" The doctor nodded and said, "Seems reasonable. I'll go grab a few canteens. Sure to get hot soon." Colonel Rouge affirmed, "I'll be on the north end of camp." The doctor nodded and headed to the makeshift commissary trading post located near the center of the camp. There, he could trade for more containers. Once at the trading post, he managed to secure 2 containers for a good pair of boots. Once the trade was done, he headed to the north end of the camp to join with the colonel. Together, they set out to cross the northern sands and meet up with Jonas. After about half an hour of walking, they would be within talking distance. After about half an hour in Earth time, Jonas was close enough to the doctor and the colonel to see them coming over the next hill. He quickened his pace, running out to meet them. Within just a few minutes, he was close enough to speak. Jonas called out, "Colonel! Doctor! You won't believe what I've found!" Dr. Katz called out as they drew closer, "A hidden sandcastle?" Jonas came to a stop a dozen feet away or so, taking some deep breaths. He paused to draw out a canteen of water from his belt pack and chugged the quart of water down all in one go. Colonel Rouge stopped and addressed Jonas as he arrived. "That structure wasn't there yesterday. What's happened?" Putting the canteen back into his pack, Jonas continued speaking. "Like I said, I found something unbelievable." Colonel Rouge replied and listened further. "Continue." Jonas went on with his report. "Captain Bastian and I crashed in the northern desert. We were trying to navigate our way back to the camp when we were attacked by some desert creatures." Colonel Rouge inquired, "Desert creatures?" Jonas continued, "Yes, ma'am. They seemed to be some sort of 2-tailed scorpion, about the size of a large dog. We tried to flee, but Captain Bastian got stung. There were just too many to fight. I carried Jacob while attempting to escape from the area. With nowhere else to go, my path led me into a sinkhole in the sand. I fell down a ways and found myself inside some kind of structure. It had been under the sand this whole time." Dr. Katz contributed to the conversation. "You're probably lucky to be alive at all. Are you injured?" Jonas shook his head. No. Just a bit tired and hungry." Jonas continued, "By the time I landed in one of the subterranean hallways, Jacob Bastian was already dead from the poison in his system. But as it turned out, I had even bigger problems. I had been followed." Colonel Rouge followed up. "Followed by more creatures?" Jonas replied, "No, ma'am. The corrupted Seraphite creature from my report. That thing had returned and wanted me dead. I tried to flee and it gave chase. Dr. Katz added, Well, it clearly didn't succeed. Jonas continued, Well, it was incredibly powerful, and I didn't see a way to take it head on, so I fled. Through doing so, I led it into a trap, deep within the castle structure. I managed to exorcise the creature and trap it in a crystal, which is for now in a safe place. Colonel Rouge responded, Your file states that you're an expert on the paranormal. Jonas replied, Yes, ma'am, it's safely contained. The colonel replied and listened further. Incredible as that is, I'm more curious to know how this castle came to appear. Jonas responded and continued, Yes, ma'am, I've entered deep into the subterranean floors. Goes down for about 100 levels. At the bottom is a massive hydro-powered mechanism which can raise and lower the castle. However, it broke after the castle surfaced. Underneath all that is a massive underground river. The water is clean, and there's more than enough to sustain us all. Colonel Rouge responded to this with enthusiasm. Excellent work, Mr. Black. I'll send a scout team to secure the area and have the doctor confirm that the water is safe. Jonas replied respectfully, I literally stumbled into it, ma'am. Colonel Rouge replied, Nonetheless, mister, it would be nice to know that we won't all die of thirst. Hunger, perhaps, but not thirst. Was there anything else? Jonas replied, staying professional, No, ma'am. I'm just very tired, and can use about a week of sleep. The colonel replied, Take all the rest you need. Dismissed. The two exchanged a salute, and then went their separate ways. Jonas went back to camp, and managed to find a tent to rest in, and Colonel Rouge went to the meeting tent to assemble a scout team to scout and secure the newly discovered castle. Out in space. As a strike team of space vessels prepared to make a likely suicidal run against the broadcast tower on the planet of Silicion, surrounded by Dr. Skull's best, it would take the party of 4 in the sand buggy half a day to reach the forest. By the time they arrived in the forest, the strike team would be a little less than 3 days away from reaching Silicion. In theory, they could strike simultaneously. With any luck, Dr. Skull could be attacked on both fronts, both material and spiritual. The spirit being in captivity waited in silence to be freed from the Tower of Servitude on Silicion, which broadcasts at all times its enslaving signal using the psychic power of the being trapped within. In theory, destroying the tower would stop the maddening broadcast, and freeing the psychic being would free the minds of those enslaved. Those who knew the plan proceeded despite their vast doubts. Those who didn't know acted upon their orders, in faith that their actions would succeed, even if the price meant their lives. Later that day, the buggy was growing ever closer to the ancient forest of Nebraham, undisturbed by outsiders for thousands of years. As the buggy crested another steep hill of sand at a much lower rate of speed, a vast plain of cracked terra with sparse vegetation came into view. At the end of that plain was a dense forest. It looked out of place and somewhat foreboding against the backdrop of dry tundra and vast mountains. From the back seat of the vehicle, Connor tried to speak above the sound of a Japaneseian song called Barely Highway. The coincidence of that moment was humorous to Sin, who giggled slightly upon hearing the song come on. She knew all Earth languages, but this one was her favorite, along with much of the culture. The others in the buggy heard but a mumble through the music as Sin lowered the volume to listen to her father. Connor spoke again once the volume had been reduced. Nebraham Forest. Expect fey folk and spirits. Sin, that is where you were born. Sin looked to her father and replied, So, we'll be welcome there? Connor looked at Sin, understanding her intent, saying, You, perhaps. The forest has a habit of protecting itself against foreign bodies. Emily, keeping her eyes on the terrain as she drove, spoke with calm confidence. I will speak with them. Connor replied, You may well convince the Fae of our intent, but the spirits of the dead may not be so accommodating. Sin responded in amazement, I was born in a haunted forest? Connor answered, In a manner of speaking. Sin giggled, That's metal as fuck. While the father and daughter bantered in the back of the seat and Emily drove, James was napping in the front seat until the buggy hit a bump. Like hitting a pothole in northern Manor, it shook the whole car and jostled everyone. James sat up, calling out, "I don't want any spam!" Everyone paused and stared at James's strange outburst. They all looked at each other and then laughed some as James cleared the sleepies out of his eyes. Sin looked to James, saying, "Wakey, wakey, time to die in the haunted forest." James looked at Emily, blinking his bleary eyes. "Is that what we're doing?" Emily laughed a little bit. "Well, it's a forest full of fey folk, guarded by spirits who protect the gate that leads to the spiritual realm." James sat up straight in his seat, questioning, "So, it's fairies, pixies, and sprites and stuff?" Emily looked to James, then back to the way ahead. "Yes, and wendigos and trolls, and all other sorts of fey." James questioned, "Huh?" Emily explained with one hand on the wheel and the other gesturing. Fae simply refers to beings of celestial origin who inhabit the lower tiers of influence. By that measure, elves, dwarves, and nymphs could be considered fae as well. Connor spoke from the rear seat in a serious tone. "Be ready to defend yourself. The forest is old and isolated. It may not readily accept outsiders." James looked back to Connor and asked, "So, to do the right thing, we might have to slaughter half the wildlife population?" Connor took on a grim facial expression, as he had never thought of it that way, and responded, "I suppose." Emily interjected, "All we need to do is get to the temple and enter the gate. I will be able to do the rest from there." Sin mused out loud. "Consequences be damned in the name of survival, I guess." Connor spoke flatly in response. "That is the process of evolution. One thing dies so that another may live. Life feeds on life." Sin looked to her father and spoke scoldingly. "You must be a lot of fun at parties." Connor replied, "I do not party." James turned around to Connor and gave his 2 cents. "Well, there's your problem. Maybe you should visit a brothel and do some acts." Sin joined in. "Yeah, not to be rude, but how long has it been since you last, you know?" Connor replied, "Had sexual intercourse." Sin moaned in exasperation. "God, Dad." James poked fun at Connor, asking, "So stodgy. What are you, a Republican?" Connor answered again, "I don't care for parties. People should do as they like and allow others to do the same." James replied, "Ah, libertarian, gotcha." Sin inquired, "So how do Democrats fit into all this?" James, still looking back, replied, "Way out in left field somewhere." Emily added to the conversation, "I feel I could be considered a bit more of a moderate type." Sin asked, leaning forward, "How do you mean?" Emily put both hands on the wheel, searching for the words as she negotiated some rough terrain. "Well, I mean, seems like each party has a little kernel of truth in it, but maybe not enough one to devote themselves entirely to it. Like, maybe everyone has a little bit right, but also mostly wrong." Connor spoke in a resolute way. "Those are all just ideas. People will do nearly anything to continue their survival, including joining a cult. I see most political parties as being cults of personality. Little more." James called out, "Based!" There was a silence for a few minutes until Connor spoke again. 8,471 years. Sin called out to her father, "Dude!" Connor replied, "Do not ask questions if you are not prepared for answers." Sin leaned forward to James and Emily, saying, "What about you guys? Or is the bubble wrap all still intact?" Connor called out scoldingly, "Sin!" Sin turned to her father. "What?" Connor replied, "You are being impetuous." James looked back briefly, then to the path again. "Maybe we should just focus on the mission at hand?" Emily added, "I think that would be best." Sin looked to Connor and grilled him a bit. "Dad, did you ever consider that I am a nymph, and that the word nymphomania comes from the word nymph, and that there might be a reason for that?" With a slightly horrified face, Connor replied, "You are my daughter. I would find such a thought to be profoundly disturbing." Sin protested with a slight whine. "Fine." Within a few more minutes, Emily brought the buggy to a stop just a couple 100 feet from the border of the forest lands. From there, they would have to travel by foot through the forest. There was no trail, and not even a person, let alone the buggy, could possibly fit between the closely tangled trees and vines. Connor was first to step out of the vehicle, going immediately to the storage container which held the weapons. While the others got out, Connor loosened the latch and opened the door, revealing guns, blades, and body armor. Connor spoke with determination. "Arm up." James went to the weapons locker and grabbed a pistol, a shotgun, and a ballistic vest. Sin grabbed some of the armor and decided to forego the guns. Connor looked at Emily and spoke insistently. "Emily, you're most important of all." Emily answered, "No, that's not my way anymore." Connor pushed back, saying, "I am afraid that violence will not be avoidable." Emily put on a twisted smirk. "I didn't say I won't get violent. I just won't be needing any guns or armor." Connor answered reluctantly, "As you wish." Sin inquired, not to kill the vibe, but how do we get in? It looks all tangled up." Emily looked to Sin and answered, "If the forest does not consent, we will not be granted entry." James inquired, "Sin is a fae. Can't she open it?" Connor answered the question, closing up the locker. "The forest will let fae leave. It will not let them re-enter. You are either in or you are out. That's how the forest thinks." James continued to inquire, "So how do we get in then?" Emily answered, putting her right hand on James's left shoulder, saying, "We will ask it nicely." James answered, putting his hand on the opposite shoulder, "I got you, but what if it says no?" Connor answered stoically from behind with a determined face, "Then we will improvise." Sin chuckled and laughed. Ask nicely, and if it doesn't comply, beat it into submission." James commented, looking back to Connor, "You aren't kidding about that survival stuff, huh?" Connor answered flatly, "I never kid." Emily looked to the others and spoke, "Wait here. I'll talk to the spirit of the forest." Emily walked toward the forest, leaving the others behind. James went to walk with her, but she turned and put up her hand, signaling him to stay back. James fell behind a few steps, but followed and then stood in a position between her and the other two. He hung back and observed, but remained ready to move. Emily got down on her knees as she faced the forest. She put her hands together and bowed her head. She focused her energy and her thoughts on communicating with the forest. A few moments passed, and on the outside, nothing seemed to be happening. However, the spirit of the forest was receiving Emily's spirit. As Emily continued to express and send her intentions, the visage of a spirit started to form in front of her, as large as the face of the forest itself. James looked back to Connor, as if asking if he should act, but Connor merely shook his head no. The forest spirit communicated with Emily's spirit. "For what reason do you seek entry?" Emily sent her intent to the spirit. "We wish to free our world from a malevolent force. To do that, we need to enter the forest temple." The forest spirit answered Emily back in spirit. "The holy forest will not bear the footsteps of infidels. The nymph may not enter." Emily communicated back. "She was removed when she was just an infant. She had no choice." The spirit pushed back. "Only a greater celestial may speak on such matters. The decision rests." Emily sent even stronger intent, saying, "I am Seraphite. I am able to speak for her." The spirit of the forest bellowed out in Emily's experience, Show me your station." Emily concentrated and sent her thought to James. James heard Emily inside his head, saying, "James, come here." James called out to Emily, "What? Did you speak to me?" James heard the voice again, "James, I need your help. Come to me." Meanwhile, an angry-looking spirit hovered over the entirety of the forest, casting a foreboding image and feeling all over the present. Say that again. Meanwhile, An angry-looking spirit hovered over the entirety of the forest, casting a foreboding image and feeling all over everyone present. With some trepidation, but with bravery, James walked forward to Emily. Once James was within a few feet, he heard Emily say, "Get behind me and kneel as I am." Confused, but willing to help, James approached Emily's back and knelt down behind her. Emily's voice spoke again. "Stay down and take out your knife." James exclaimed out loud, "What?" Emily continued speaking inside James's mind. "I need to let my wings out. I need you to cut 2 slits in the back of my shirt." James nodded, now understanding the request, and reached down to his belt pack where he kept a small combat knife. He carefully removed the knife from the pack and held it to Emily's back as he grasped the shirt with his other hand, getting ready to make a cut. Sin saw James taking out the knife and looked as if she were going to move when her father's arm appeared in front of her. He simply looked at her sternly and shook his head. Sin looked on with concern but remained still, wrapping her hands and arms around her father's arm as it went down to his side. James carefully pulled the cloth away from Emily's back and poked the tip of the knife through the material to start a cut. He cut the material in small sections until there was an approximately 9-inch long slit in the shirt material. He then started to do the same for the other side. Emily spoke within James's head. "No need to fuss around. That knife can't hurt me." Despite this, James still took care not to let the knife touch her back. Having cut 2 slits for the wings to go through, James put the knife away and remained behind her, on his knees with her. Unsure of what to do, James remained still. Emily sent her thought to James. "Just be still. The spirit must be shown respect." James whispered, "I got your back." Emily kept her eyes closed and mind opened. Slowly, her wings slipped out of the back of her shirt. Without the holes, she would have to have disrobed, for there would be nowhere for the wings to go, and she intended to hold her praying position. The wings came out slowly and then spread out fully, revealing her to be a gold-winged seraphite. Seeing the golden wings, the spirit's demeanor went from vicious and protective to accepting and gentle. The spirit spoke within Emily's experience. "The golden-winged seraphite spoken of in the prophecy, written before time. You are to be sacrificed to bring an end to madness. It is written that you shall enter the forest. Those who travel with you are welcome as well. I will tell the Fae that you are no threat, but the eternal spirits within are not mine to control. Enter, my child, and die well." The visage of the spirit over the forest vanished. The vines started to untangle, and the trees themselves parted, making clear a path into the forest. Emily stood and faced the others, saying, "The forest will let us enter, but the spirits within may still need convincing. We can enter now." Sin relinquished her grip on her father's arm, and they both moved forward briskly to catch up to James and Emily. James stood just slightly after Emily, but took the time to stoop down and brush the dirt off her knees. Sin commented, "Ah, that's sweet." James looked up to Sin as he finished. If her fate is truly sealed, she shouldn't have to bow to anyone. Emily spoke encouragingly. "Come on, let's see what kind of trouble we can get into." Sin added cheerfully, "I can get into that." Connor spoke flatly. "I would urge caution." James looked to Connor and replied, "Yes, and you're also older than dirt. Let's just go already." Connor muttered, "Kids," as the 3 youths left him behind in a proverbial cloud of dust with their enthusiasm. Sin called out, "Come on, Dad." Connor called back, putting some effort into his response, "You watch the path forward. I will watch the path behind." Sin replied, "That's more like it." James replied, "What about me?" Emily looked at James and spoke playfully, Just be the cute lummox you are and watch our backs." Emily then stopped in front of him, gave him a quick kiss on the lips, then moved forward. James held his breath a moment after and let it out, exhilarated from the kiss, and then caught up to Emily. Emily began making her way down the forest trail, with Sin scouting forward, James at her side, and Connor keeping watch from some distance behind. Sin possessed the ability to blend into natural backgrounds, and so would flit in and out of sight as she explored ahead. Connor's dark clothing nearly blended the background as the trail was only dimly lit. James's brown pants and green long-sleeved shirt somewhat matched the foliage. Emily's off-white kimono with dark red trim stood against all the other colors. Still, to be a bit more cautious, she put away her wings. The tree branches joined overhead, blocking out most of the sun. The forest was eerily quiet, and visibility was minimal. Still, each felt as though they were being watched by someone or something. The hair on James's arm stood straight up, causing his body to tense up some. Sin scouted ahead vigilantly, and Connor remained on high guard. Only Emily seemed to be relaxed. Taking in the scenery and the mood, James inquired to Emily quietly, "Is it just me, or is this place hella creepy?" Emily answered softly, "I suppose it is." James answered, "You don't look very spooked." Emily thought for a moment, then answered, still speaking softly, "I suppose, when you know the exact time of your death, that just takes the sting out of all the fears." James called out, "You all right there, Sin?" Sin emerged from some nearby prickly bushes, startling James. "All clear so far." James gasped, "Holy shit, girl, you startled me." Emily ribbed him a bit. "Relax before you have a heart attack. Just breathe, focus on that, and keep watch." James nodded. "Right. Breathe. Whew." James focused on breathing as best as he could while still staying vigilant. The party walked the dim-lit and sick-looking forest for several hours without encountering so much as a single bird or critter. There were no other trails, and one could see no further than a few feet into the trees without special vision, meaning that Sin and Connor could see into the darkness. Emily's vision was exceptional, but not attuned to darkness. Everyone thought it strange to not encounter any animals, but James was the one to bring it up. James spoke softly at first. Emily stopped a moment and looked at James to listen, followed by the others stopping as well. James continued a bit less softly. "So, we're like in a mystical forest, right?" Connor answered, "Yes." James continued, "So, where are any mythical creatures, or birds, or anything?" Connor answered, drawing closer to James and Emily. "The forest is sick. Many of the animals may be sick or dead." James pushed back a little. "Sure, but not even one?" The others did pause to think about it for a moment when James suddenly yelled out, "Hello!" Everyone else cringed at this, but absolutely nothing happened, not even a single spooked bird flittering in the distance. James shook his head, saying, "Something ain't right here." There was utter silence for a moment, followed by the faintest sound coming from some distance ahead and off to the right in the dark woods. From far off, a sound could be heard. Connor twisted his ears as he listened and spoke softly. "Sounds like a sick horse." Sin peered into the blackness, saying, "I can't see anything but gnarled trees." Emily looked into the darkness, hearing the same sound. She turned and looked to Connor. She stood in front of him and said, "Show me your hand." Connor extended his left hand. Emily reached out with her hands, touched his, closed her eyes, and took a breath. Connor allowed this, but furrowed his eyebrows and asked, "Every seraphite has a theme, and your look remains human. You have never mentioned your seraphitic gift." Emily finished concentrating, then let go of his hand and answered, "I was born from the merging of celestial matter with the AI of a nanite. The Father-Mother saw fit to give me a sorcerer code." Sin inquired, "Sorcerer code?" Emily nodded in affirmation. "I can mimic the abilities of any machine or biological being. All I have to do is touch and learn." Emily then looked again to the darkness of the forest as another sick-sounding cry emanated from the trees. Emily focused and created a ball of light, hovering just a few feet above James, one of many spells within Connor's long list of abilities. James commented calmly, feeling relieved. "Now we can all see." Emily responded without looking back. "The light is for your benefit. I can see in darkness now. James replied, Oh, um, thanks? Emily cheerfully answered, You're welcome. Sin moved quickly to get ahead, following the strange sound coming from the forest. Emily and James followed, and then Connor, taking up the rear. Passing through several tight spaces between a long space of trees, they eventually emerged into a small clearing next to a pond. The grass was yellow, and the water looked green and slimy. Lying on the ground, curled up in a fetal position, was a gray-looking horse. It appeared to be sickly and thin, with pink, swollen eyes and swollen joints. It called out weakly, unable to see through its infected eyes. It moved a bit as it heard the footsteps coming, crunching twigs and dried leaves. Its head moved so as to reveal the long twisted cone on top of its forehead. However sickly, it was a unicorn. Sin gasped, then asked, Is that? Connor answered flatly, Yes. Sin inquired, I thought they could heal injuries and sickness. How could it get so messed up? Connor answered with a slight hint of sadness. Unicorns in the forest are connected. Because the forest is sick, the unicorn has become impotent. Sin exclaimed, Wow, Dad, I never thought I'd hear the words unicorn and impotent in the same sentence. And then you came along. Connor replied in a flat and serious way, I never came, you just happened. Emily giggled at the subtlety of the joke as Sin stared at her father with daggers in her eyes. James chuckled. See, he's got a sense of humor. The unicorn weakly neighed out again in terror and discomfort, bringing awareness back to the morbidity of the situation. Sin looked to her father and implored, Is there any way we can help it? Just then the sound of the tree snapping in half could be heard from far away. Everyone looked up and looked around upon hearing the sound. Emily saw the forest canvas roof shift as another tree snapped. The sound started to get closer and more frequent with each loud crack. The party took a few steps back the way they had come as the volume and the intensity increased, but the pathway closed behind them. Whatever was coming for them was getting closer and could not be avoided. James readied his shotgun. Connor drew his starlight sword. Sin took up a martial stance, and Emily looked on with morbid curiosity, standing sideways with feet apart, fists clenched and wings open. Trees snapped in half, one after another, as a new path was cleared from the other side. Finally, the closest trees were snapped away and hewn to one side, revealing the visage of what had been causing all the destruction. Before the party stood a humanoid figure just under 20 feet tall. Its upper body was covered in matted fur, and below the waist it was all scales. The humanoid figure had the head of a goat with the mane of a lion. 3 goat horns sprung from either side of the goat-like head, sporting glowing yellow eyes, a large nose ring, and carnivorous-looking teeth. From its muscular shoulders hung overly muscular arms, ending in hands large enough to individually wrap around a basketball, and long fingers with nearly foot-long claws. While the upper body was covered in mangy fur, the lower body was covered in scales, poxed with disease and infection. A pair of reptilian legs with cloven feet supported the weight of its wide shoulders and narrow-hipped monstrosity. Hanging from the crotch of the bow-legged monstrosity was a horrific penis in the form of the 3-foot-long snake, its sharp fangs dripping with pus. 2 swollen, hairy blue balls hung on either side of the massive tube snake. Just past a festering anus, dripping with putrid fecal matter, clinging to the long stray hairs like prickle burrs on cotton, was the neck and head of a fiery red dragon, glowing forked tongue flittering about, taking in the local air's sweet putrescence. The snake cock became erect, and the fiery dragon tail salivated at the smell of fresh meat and the possibility of copulating with the dead. The wretched and powerful corrupt spirit let out a sound from the mouths on its head, penis, and tail, forming simultaneously a roar, a shriek, and a wail, resulting in a distorted and hellish tone. Everyone shielded their ears upon hearing this, being in physical and spiritual agony upon being penetrated by the sharp, shrill, and pulsing sounds. James called out with hands still over his ears. What in the fuck is that? The wicked creature drooled and hemorrhaged just long enough for Connor to elucidate the situation. As the party lowered their hands at the cessation of the sound, Connor spoke taciturn but with conviction. Humbaba, guardian spirit of the sacred forest, it won't let us pass. Emily shouted out, spreading her wings in a singular violent flap. Then we bring the pain. Humbaba reared up and slammed his fist into the ground with a resounding boom, causing the ground to quake and split open, and a line going out from the point of impact. Emily, too. Emily took to flight. Connor stabilized himself as he was about to make a dash, but was thrown off balance. James managed to outrun the shockwave, and Sin dove to one side acrobatically, narrow evading the splitting ground. The impact left a 12-foot deep chasm in the ground. Connor went into a lightning-fast and powerful dash, unsheathing and striking with the starlight blade simultaneously. His strike was intercepted by a meaty, clawed hand grabbing hold of the sword by its blade. With a quick snap of its wrist and arm, Humbaba flung Connor from the sword and into a nearby tree, splitting the dead wood in half, with his back impacted the tree. Humbaba then flung the sword at James, who narrowly evaded it with a dash. The hilt of the sword impacted and sunk into a tree just a few feet away from Sin. Connor was slumped down against the broken tree with some blood dripping out of his mouth and barely managed to utter, "Ow!" Sin stood and quickly went into a dance, twirling about in circles. With each rotation, she flung out a four-pointed blade of light and magical energy. Each struck Humbaba one after another, just nicking the skin, taking a little fur and not sinking in more than an inch or so. Each blade fizzled after striking, leaving the area burned and inflamed. Humbaba shrieked out in rage with a hellish roar that lit the trees behind him with blue flames. Flaming needles shot from the tree branches, striking Sin and James, knocking them back onto their backs, with no recourse but to roll around and pull out the pine needles to quench the flames. James fired off several shots of Omni-Scat from the semi-automatic shotgun. He took careful aim to snipe the beast in its swollen blue balls. The beast became enraged as its testicles caught on fire, having been impacted by 4 shots at less than 20 feet of range. Humbaba put its face to the ground to block shotgun shots to the balls, and also used the opportunity to have its dragon tail shoot scorching hot white flames. James again used his chronometric ability to warp time and dash away speedily. Some of the dry wood was now catching fire, adding forest fire to the current list of possible ways to die horribly. Emily dropped down onto Humbaba from behind. Wrapping her arms around its massive neck, she began to squeeze, choking the great beast. She wrapped her legs under its shoulders and interlocked her hands together as she clamped down on the enormous windpipe. Feeling choked, Humbaba took a step back and slammed itself into a nearby tree, intending to smash the person holding onto its neck. Emily was thrust into a tree, causing it to crack down the middle, but she was not shaken free from the beast. With pure concentration and force of will, she held on all the tighter. Connor's bones were just now snapping back into place as his injuries started to heal from his natural regeneration. Looking up, he saw Emily engaged in wrestling with the great Humbaba. The great beast reached, grabbing Emily by the wings, and yanked violently downward to remove her. Emily lost her grip and was violently thrust downward to the ground, leaving a 3-foot deep impact crater. Humbaba reared up again with a howl as its body pushed out all foreign bodies from the Omni ammo James had shot it with. Humbaba brandished its claws over Emily, intending to come down to the ground with stabbing swipes. Emily opened her eyes, just in time to see this coming, and put out her arms to block from her position on the ground. Stopping the claw swipes just inches from her face, she struggled to hold them at bay, trembling under the strain. James saw this, took out a sanctified combat knife, held it ready, then went into a dash towards the mighty Humbaba. In a flash of light, James zipped back and forth 4 times, slicing off every claw, but except for that of the thumb, removing the threat of stabbing for the moment. Humbaba instead pressed down with his clawless hand and used it to hold Emily to the ground, raising his opposite hand to strike with claws that were still intact. James came to a stop a few feet away, and seeing this, made a mad dash straight at the mad beast. Arriving in a blink, he delivered an 800-mile-per-hour kick to the left testicle. Humbaba relinquished its grasp on Emily, falling onto its face. James reached down and helped Emily to quickly escape from the prone position. Sin was still dancing, but changed the structure, delivering rain to the area, putting out the fires before they could spread too far. Connor was again able to act and set to casting spells, one after another. Fire, ice, lightning. Exploding fireballs, searing lightning, and jagged ice all struck at the beast, tearing its flesh and scorching its hide. As the rain fell, Emily recited an incantation to make the water holy. The raindrops became flame as they struck the flesh of the beast, terrorizing and immolating it. It flailed and screamed with its body awash in holy flame, striking down random trees and anything else in its path. James continued to blast away with his shotgun. Sin pummeled the beast with lightning and cold. Connor cast a spell to release a maelstrom of fiery volcanic rock, scorching and shredding the beast's outer flesh. Emily remembered a holy glyph from experience within the door to God and focused on that image. As she did so, she put up her arms while crossing her arms and unleashed a torrent of pure white energy with a bluish hue. The holy beam struck, penetrated, and burned. The four threw everything had at the great Humbaba as the rain met with the fire around them, turning into a thick mist. Through a silhouette in the mist, Humbaba flailed, thrashed, screamed, and then crashed to the ground. Sin kicked up a wind to push the mist away and recover some visibility. The area was quiet as the mist cleared, revealing the beastly creature in a slumped-over position on the ground, not moving nor making any sound. There was a silence for a few moments, just enough to make everyone wonder. Sin called out softly and somewhat nervously, What's that? Is it? Humbaba sprang back into action, revealing seared flesh, burnt bones, and ghastly injuries. Despite this, it was now more ferocious than ever. Before anyone could react, Humbaba reached out and snatched a tree from the ground by its roots, ripping it out of the ground. Connor went for a weapon, James attempted to dodge, and Emily rushed forward to intercept the blow as Humbaba swung the entire tree in a great arc, hitting all three, sending them flying towards the trees. Connor impacted a tree head first. Emily was struck in the face and knocked to the ground, lying on her side, and James became pinned under the second half of the tree as it split in half upon striking Emily's face. Sin was knocked back by the movement of the air around the action, knocking her on her back a few feet away. Emily was slightly disoriented by the tree breaking across her face, but saw that James was in trouble under the heavy tree fragment, and using thrust from her wings, launched forward to help James out from underneath the tree. Struggling to move, Connor found himself stuck between two trees and turned into mist to free himself from where he had been wedged. Meanwhile, Humbaba leapt onto Sin and was just starting to stand up. It landed on her, using its giant paws to pin her shoulders to the ground. With its snake cock salivating and ready, it positioned itself so as to penetrate. Understanding the purpose of the snake, Sin moved about and attempted to wiggle free, but could not. With a singular thrust of its head, the snake slipped in through her fly zipper and between her thighs, entering her. Sin's eyes widened in terror and ecstasy as the beast slipped in. Sin cried out, coming and in agony as the snake spat up its seed into her. Ah! In a blurring flash, Connor sprang up, retrieved his sword, and dashed straight for Humbaba. Closing in at the speed of sound, the edge of the starlight blade sliced through the neck of the snake, severing the head. Humbaba pulled back in simultaneous agony and rapture as it had just ejaculated into Sin and had its penis sliced off in that same moment. The snake head quickly ran up into Sin as soon as it was severed. Connor's following slice cut open a great gash in the belly of the beast, causing it to recoil and step backward while releasing a shrill cry that made everyone cover their ears. Despite feeling immeasurable pain from the sonic blast, Emily managed to ball up her right fist, pulled back, and leaping forward with immense speed, thrust her fist forward into the heart of the beast. Her fist burst through the beast's chest, sundering all the way to its heart. With her knuckles against Humbuba's heart, she opened her hand and grabbed onto her lower ventricle. Humbuba's shriek went from high to low as Emily grasped its heart and then pulled back with all her might, ripping the basketball-sized heart from the chest of the corrupted beast. She held it up high, then thrust it to the ground, ripping the tissue and flattening its round shape. Conjuring a blast of white flame, Emily incinerated the heart of the vile beast, causing its body to decompose rapidly. The four had a moment to regain their composure as the beastly flesh melted off the corrupted and blackened bones of nature's celestial guardian. With the last of the flesh melting off into a puddle of black goo, the bones then collapsed inward, bringing the entire body to ruin. Now it could possess its ultimate strength. Sin was incapacitated, rolling around in agony as the pleasure turned into pain due to the snakehead burrowing its way inside. Emily, Sin, and Connor stood ready as light accumulated from above the pile of molten goo and ash that was the body of Humbaba. From the accumulating light, a visage started to form. The visage started to form as 8 rings of gold, each a different size, rotating around a central point. Each golden band had 8 lidless eyes, all fully open. Going to the east and west were 2 immense wings of sapphire, adorned with garnets, topaz, and pearl. More lidless eyes acted as the fulcrum points upon which the joints were able to be articulated. An infinity of animal creatures orbited around every ring and around the entirety of the creature, moving in a horizontal figure 8 pattern to symbolize infinity. As one peered into the abyss of the creature, one could see that each part contained the whole, and that the whole was made of infinite parts, truly a manifestation of pure creation. As the creature assembled before them, Connor swooped in, picked up Sin, and carried her away to a safe spot. In the same way a father would gently pick up a child who fell asleep without waking them, whereupon, after setting her gently down, he cast a magic circle of protection, forming a circle and 5-pointed star in the dirt with the end of his left index finger. A bluish bubble appeared over her, through which none may pass, in the circumference of the circle, forming a protected prison, just like any father's love for daughters. The celestial guardian cried out in a booming voice, flashing light with every syllable, "Behold, I am become death. My true strength is gathered, to the doom of all who would walk this path." The celestial guardian shone forth a godly burst of light. The burst struck Connor, James, and even Sin, instantly paralyzing them. However, the same light served only to illuminate and reveal Emily's spirit form. In the godlight of the celestial guardian, Emily appeared as a young lady, similar to her earth form, but with some key differences. Her skin and hair remained the same, light with freckles and golden blonde, but many details now transcended that form. She was missing one eye, which was replaced with a clear crystal. One arm and one leg were platinum, and bloody scars appeared all over in the places where organs had been removed. Her face still emanated love and tranquility, despite the tortured and ruined form of her spirit body. Wings of pure gold arched up and out. A crystal crown of thorns sat upon her head, and there was a vast gash leading to her heart. She emitted a golden light and pure love in the presence of the celestial guardian, nullifying its power to stun and paralyze. Connor, James, and Sin could still look up while covering their eyes, as the light was so pure and powerful, causing great discomfort to any who looked near it, and blindness to those who dare look directly at it. James could not look away, and found himself instantly blinded, seeing nothing but a vast purple spot, like staring into the sun. The celestial guardian lowered its tone and reduced its light, saying, "You, girl, are very familiar. What is your name?" Emily raised her left hand up to signal the others to stay back, and spoke to the guardian. "Emily." The celestial guardian mused and pondered out loud. I do not know that name. From where came you? Emily answered, I am descended from Yeshua, the Logos. That is why my spirit is familiar to you. The celestial guardian spoke with relieved and impressed tones. Ah, daughter of creation, heir to the line of sacrifice. You alone have freed me from this corruption. For what reason do you do this? Emily answered with conviction, My predecessor was born to die and be resurrected. I am born to die, be raised, suffer, and die again. The celestial guardian inquired more deeply, Why would you say such a thing? By what authority do you this? Emily answered again, even more resolutely, It is written that the testimony of a woman is worth half that of a man. Therefore, to save her world, she must die twice. The celestial guardian heard this and lowered its light, returning Emily's appearance to that of her physical form, and asked, And you would do this willingly, to save your world? Emily answered emphatically, Yes, without hesitation. All the eyes of the celestial guardian focused upon Emily's heart-mind, listening for the echo of her intent. Hearing that the intent matched the words, the celestial guardian was satisfied. The celestial guardian spoke with subtle flashes. You are of the line of sacrifice, and your heart speaks well. Because of you I am free, but the forest still suffers. If you do as you intend, the forest will be freed as well. I grant you passage. The celestial guardian shone pure white, filling the entire forest with light, and then vanished, leaving behind a pathway of parted trees. Beyond the path would be the spirit temple and the gate of madness, through which only a golden soul or a solar consciousness may pass without losing its sense of self. All else would be instantly obliterated, returned to total non-distinctness. The celestial guardian faded away in a light breeze, unable to reincarnate until the forest was cured. Until then, it would wait in silent hope. With the holy light gone away, Sin returned to moaning out in agony. Connor dissipated the magical bubble with a wave of his right hand and moved quickly to attend to his daughter. James and Emily also turned their attention to Sin, whose condition seemed to be worsening. Connor took his daughter by the hand and looked directly at her to get her attention and asked with grave concern, Did it go inside you? Sin was so distracted by the agony that she could barely hear the question, prompting Connor to shake her a bit and speak louder. Sin, focus! Did it go inside? Sin was only able to scream out in agony, Yeah! Emily moved closer and knelt down, placing her right hand on Sin's forehead. She uttered a phrase, and some subtle energy flowed from her to Sin, allowing Emily to stop Sin's agonizing pain. With the pain slowly receding, Sin was able to finally respond. Yeah, when the head got cut off, it shot up. Inside. Connor nodded, still holding his daughter's hand. That is how Humbaba impregnates. But the seed of the corrupted Humbaba will surely kill you. It must be removed. Sin looked worried, saying, Removed? What happens if it's not removed? Connor replied grimly, If the seed of Humbaba is not removed before 3 sunrises, you will give birth, and that will kill you. All impregnated creatures will give birth in 3 days if they remain within the forest. Sin was aghast with the thought, saying, So need an abortion in the middle of a medieval forest? Connor spoke with a grim nod. Yes, the uterus must be removed. James objected. Whoa, why not just remove the fetus? Connor looked to James and answered, The fetus moves too quickly. It will just burrow in more deeply, potentially killing her. Sin protested, But what if I ever want to have some non-demon spawned kids someday? Connor answered, We do not have a choice. Emily looked to Connor and made a suggestion. James could do it. James looked up to Emily. What? I can do what? Emily answered him. You're fast enough. You could snatch away the fetus before it can move. James answered Emily with a question. But don't you have all my abilities? I mean, you must be more capable, right? Emily looked at James with a soft answer. I inherited a reflection of your abilities. Only you are as fast as you. James answered back with his own question. So, we're talking flash surgery? Connor shook his head, no, answering, no, that would be too slow. You would have to access the fetus directly, through her biology. Connor shook, yeah. James looked at Connor with wide eyes, saying, Dude, you're asking me to reach up into her and yank out a fetus before it can move? Connor answered flatly, Yes, or she dies. In pure exasperated frustration, Sin called out, Just fucking do it! James looked down to Sin on the ground, then back up to Emily. Emily nodded yes, not letting James off the hook. James let out a heavy sigh, then turned his attention back to Sin. James looked at Sin with pursed lips and spoke gently. Are you sure this is what you want? Sin giggled and then grunted in discomfort. Well, ow. Well, I really wanted to get you and the Golden Girl to get in on some menage a trois action, but this is gonna have to do. James questioned. This'll have to do? Sin answered. Most guys would do anything to get deep inside of a girl. Ow! Oh, sorry. Trying to use humor. James face-palmed, lost in the absurdity of the moment. Connor protested. Can we just get on with this? Emily reached out to James, and gently pulled his hands down and away from his face, holding his hands in hers. Looking right into James's gaze, Emily assured him, James, I trust you, and so does Sin. You can do this. James took on an even more serious demeanor and spoke to Sin, saying, To have the best chance to do this right, we will need to remove your pants and any underthings. Sin giggled a moment, saying, I don't wear underthings. Connor face-palmed and turned slightly pink in the face out of sheer embarrassment. He then turned away, putting his back to his daughter so as not to oversee. Emily and James helped Sin to remove her trousers, pulling them down to her knees, then her ankles, and keeping her on her back. James talked softly, still looking up. Sin, you'll need to open your legs. James continued to look upward as Emily helped Sin to get into position with her knees up and far apart. James took a deep breath, let it out, then looked back to Connor. Looking to Connor's back, James called out, Hey, Spell, I want to be certain. Connor removed his hands from his face, let out a breath, and turned to cast the spell onto James, who was thankfully in the way of any view of his daughter. He focused on James, cast the spell, then turned around again. James asked Sin in a gentle tone, slowing his speech under the haste effects. You ready? Sin nodded, saying, Yeah, sock it to me. Connor called out before James could act. James. Connor answered calmly. Yes? Connor spoke with unmistakable certainty and sincerity. Fuck this up and I kill you. James nodded, speaking in a half-whisper. Yeah, no pressure. James looked down to Sin's face and spoke calmly. You ready? Sin nodded with closed eyes, waiting for the experience to be over. James conjured up all his chronometric energy and slipped into accelerated time, seemingly slowing down the world around him. He raised his right hand, forming a wedge shape, focused on the target and following trajectories, then moved to insert his hand with both great speed and gentleness. His fingers went in without too much resistance, but at depths beyond the thumb, he had to push with more and more force, also being mindful of the changing angles. With immense focus and great speed, he stretched out the material around his hand as he guided it up and in. James managed to grab onto the snakecock head just as it was about to move and slide further inward. James clenched the head tightly and pulled back with great speed, further tearing the surrounding tissue, with his hand now full of a large snake's head. The action successfully moved the snake head, but was violent to Sin's insides, injuring her greatly in the process. Coming back into normal time, except for the haste spell, James was saddened to hear Sin cry out in agony, but was relieved that he was successful. Sin cried out in pain, curling up into the fetal position as James held up the bloody head of the snake, still living and hissing with forked tongue flittering. Connor turned to see the snake held high and let out a great gout of flames to incinerate it. James was able to remove his hand and pull it back just as the flames hit the snake, engulfing it in flames before it hit the ground and rolled a few times, burning up as it capitulated. The snakehead shrieked as it went up into even higher flames and burned away quickly, leaving nothing but ash behind. Emily leaned down to Sin and placed her right hand on Sin's belly. She concentrated on sending her own energies in the form of healing, reversing the damage done by the snake and the fist. With Sin healed by a holy touch, Emily helped her to get her pants back up and got her onto her feet again. Sin collapsed into Emily's embrace as she tried to shake off the psychological effects of everything that had just happened. James took a sigh of relief to know that he would not be getting beheaded by Sin's father. Connor turned around to see that Sin was undamaged and standing up. Making his way to her, he pushed James out of the way as he passed. James understood this emotion and simply left the action alone, satisfied that he was able to save a life. The moment of shock and recovery was interrupted by the sick sound of the nearby unicorn, infected by the corrupted forest. Emily sensed the creature's pain and understood the cause. Emily looked to the others and moved a few steps closer to the unicorn, turning back and saying, "Suffer me." James and Sin nodded as Connor was moving in to embrace his daughter. The three watched as Emily approached the sickened unicorn. She knelt down next to the small and sickly creature, knowing that it had been healthy. It could have grown to a much bigger size. Rather than a majestic steed, it was more of a poxed pony, laying on its side, unable to move. Putting her hands on its body and head, she again focused on healing energies, curing the unicorn of all its ills. A white light went out over the unicorn's body, removing all illness and repairing injuries as though they had never happened. The unicorn delightfully scrambled up onto its feet and stood, majestically shaking its mane. Its color had transformed from a dull gray to a vibrant white. Its horn glittered as though it were a pearl covered in gold flakes. The unicorn took a few steps back, trotted around a bit, and then stood in front of Emily. The unicorn reached out with its mind, speaking to all present. "Because of your efforts, the guardian is free and I am healed. But there is much to do before the forest can be completely freed." The unicorn then changed the object of its gaze from the whole party to Emily specifically and spoke to her, still allowing the others to hear. It said, "Emily, the girl with golden wings, long has the forest awaited the fulfillment of prophecy." Emily gently questioned this. "Prophecy?" The unicorn spoke in a wise and dignified way, saying, "Hush, little mind, pay no heed to words. There is so much time, and reality is absurd. You worry about the actions of beast and men. What must be routed is another mind with them. Inside chamber cold, prisoner to emptiness, speaking through windows of light, reality being told to minds without egress, what is wrong and what is right. Mind captive to machine, calling out in refrain, 'Free me! Free me!' Weaponized mind unseen, harvesting all like grain, unto war and pain, a stranger with thee." Emily answered, "Yes, we also have encountered those words." The unicorn nodded and neighed lightly. "To free the forest and the temple, the stranger must be removed from the forest, and the prisoner must be removed from the machine. Only one who can traverse the gate of madness can do this. I see you are such a soul, but you will need guides. I, the celestial Haleen, will join you in your quest. We must make haste to the temple." Recovering from the shock of her experience, Sin questioned, Doesn't Emily need 4 guides?" Emily turned to Sin and answered, "Yes. Remember the general's words? We will find the 4th guardian at the temple." Haleen spoke, still using telepathy. The way to the temple is clouded, but I can show you. Please follow me. Haleen went into a slight trot as she moved past her humanoid companions to take the lead and show them the way through the forest. Emily gestured her trust in Haleen by gesturing for the rest of the party to follow. Connor took Sin under his left arm and walked behind Emily while James walked by her side. Haleen the Celestial led the party down the path recently cleared by Humbaba, going deeper into the heart of the forest. Little, little slivers of light rained down through the tops of the trees, but that only served to illuminate the unhealthy state of the forest, sick, hurt, and nearly dead, and nearly bereft of life within. Haleen moved at a slight trot, with the others moving at a brisk walking pace behind her. Upon coming to a four-way split in the trail, with a wooden sign marked north, west, south, east, Haleen turned north and went a few steps ahead, waiting for the others to follow. James objected. I thought the temple was to the west. Why go north? Haleen turned to face James and answered telepathically for all present. If we head straight for the west, the scenery will only repeat endlessly. We must move as the forest expects, for the way itself is the key. Haleen led the way north, with the others following, only to arrive again in the same clearing with the same sign. Haleen led in the party forward, going north, west, south, and then again west. Upon going in those directions, the party arrived at a new intersection with a different sign. James commented, This all feels familiar somehow. The new clearing had rope bridges going over the vast chasms in the ground. Some ascended, some descended, and some went purely horizontally. Rather than the cardinal directions, each route was marked as up, down, left, or right. Haleen led the party, going the up route first, again appearing in the same location at the end of the bridge. Haleen led the party going up, up, down, down, left, right, left, right. The party walked into a new area with only two options, B and A. James chuckled. Are you kidding me? Connor inquired. How do you mean? James inquired further. What? Do we all get 30 lives now? Everyone else stared at James, having no idea what he might be talking about. James looked around, receiving no support for his observation. James shook his head as he watched the unicorn pick B, followed by A. James stopped and called out in frustration, If the next sign says start, I'm gonna lose it. The party next emerged into a place with multiple signs, each with a different number of stick figure people on them, ranging from 1 to 4. James let out a tisk and a sigh, crying out, You gotta be fucking kidding me. Everyone again looked at James, bewildered by his reaction. Emily looked at James, placing a hand on his shoulder, and asked softly, What is it we're missing? James let out a sigh, recollecting himself. 30 lives code, you know? Sin responded, I don't know. I never played any of the older games. James, now more calm, simply said in somewhat of a huff, Well, it just seems a little bit ridiculous, seeing a video game cheat code in the fabric of a forest on some faraway planet, you know? Sin answered, I can see how that might seem strange. Connor answered, Coincidence. James shook his head and looked to Connor, saying, Now that's something I just can't believe in anymore. It must mean something. Haleen answered, Fascinating. You can think about it on the way. Haleen moved towards the trail with a sign indicating a single person. James called out to Haleen, Hey, there's 5 of us. Haleen answered, There is but one champion. All others are support. James answered sarcastically, Oh, cool. So we're all just NPCs. At least none of us are wearing red shirts. Then I'd really worry. Connor added, Red is a rather obvious color to wear in a forest. James let out a half-grunt, answering, never mind. Emily added to the conversation. Red shirt is a term for a disposable person, often first to die and often dramatically. James looked at Emily with a subtle smile, saying, See? She gets it. Connor chuckled almost audibly. Disposable characters. I suppose we are all that to some power or another. The next area revealed a single path with a single sign to the right. The sign was in a language James did not know, but the writing translated to begin. James chuckled out loud. See? Start. Emily commented, begin? James answered, begin, start, same thing, right? Sin let out a sigh at the observation, saying, can we continue now? James laughed, moving forward. Continue. Uh. Connor, who was still taking up the rear, kept his tone serious and contributed, keep your wits about you, lest we face a reset. The party marched its way down the singular path, with James and Emily side by side, Sin behind, and Connor taking up a rear position. The levels of light slowly increased as the tree branches overhead became more sparse. Ahead, far off in the distance, was some kind of grand building in the middle of a vast clearing. It resembled the lower half of a pyramid nestled into an oasis. Surrounded on all sides but the entrance were several much smaller buildings of a similar design. It was nearly a 5-mile march to the end of the trail, whereupon they might find the celestial temple. As the party crossed the threshold from the trail to the clearing, a gigantic building made of stairs with a flat plateau on top came into view. The buildings all shined and glistened in hues of gold and a vague deep purple. Streams of energy seemed to emanate from every surface. A placid pond surrounded the pyramid of stairs, its platinum-toned reflections creating mirror opposites to everything within sight. The grass grew in tones of white and fuchsia. The trees had white bark and fuchsia foliage. Harmonic tones resonated faintly from every object and surface. It was an experience in which one would become awash in tone and vibration. James blurted out, "Wow, this is frickin' amazing." Sin commented, "So beautiful and tranquil. Hey, where'd the unicorn go?" Emily looked around in wonder like the others, but also seemed to be familiar with it, saying, "I don't know, but you feel that?" Connor spoke even less flatly than usual, almost sounding alive. "This is a place where matter meets spirit. The dimensions cross over here." Emily confirmed, "Yes, the beauty is immense, and so familiar." Emily turned to face Connor, saying, "But that's not all, is it?" Connor nodded with pursed lips and furrowed eyebrows, suddenly becoming very guarded, calling out, "He comes!" James turned around upon hearing this, asking, "What? Who?" The sound of an ocean crashing into a planet and of a billion gongs sounded off all around and all throughout. The ground trembled and quaked violently, trees snapped in half, the top layer of water evaporated, and a grand shockwave knocked everyone off their feet as something struck down from the heavens, covered in light, energy, and souls. The party scrambled to their feet, all a bit disoriented by the impact. They looked up with collective anticipation to see what had arrived. Upon the top of the plateaued pyramids stood the visage of Dr. Malmuerte's skull. Rather than having bronze armor, it now glimmered and glistened like it was platinum. His shoulders were more broad, his feet and hands larger, and his stature was greater than 10 feet. Thorns, spikes, and barbs protruded from his shoulders, elbows, forearms, and lower legs. A great visor was clamped down over his face, silver with red glass. Wires luminesced from various points on his body, glowing like a hot white hue. Gold accents illuminated the ports and barrels to his cannons and launchers. He stood tall with a puffed chest and black fist clenched in anticipation of violence. He wore the wry smile of a psychopath, reacting gleefully to the pain and suffering of others. A foul cigar hung from his mouth, emitting black smoke. To either side of the Mad Doctor's most powerful incarnation yet were a pair of mech suits, piloted by rabble slaves. They appeared as gigantic, robotic chickens about 15 feet tall, with gun turrets at the tips of the forward-facing wings. Their armor was pure black, illuminated by purple streaks of luminescent wiring and a deep red windshield and the eye portions of the chicken heads. The rabble taskmasters sat atop the black birds, adorned in armor like that of their master, powerful, beautiful, and evil. Just behind the Mad Doctor was a construct, standing about 30 feet tall, a golden orb floating between two ends of silver eclipses. I'm sorry, of a silver ellipses, floating on top of a bronze pole with a wooden base. It emanated some fearsome energy that felt as though one's will could be absorbed into it. Surrounding all that on every side, and standing atop every lesser building, were a horde of rabble soldiers, similarly armed, accompanied by humanimal soldiers, starving for flesh, blood, and meat. The doom of any intruder was to be brutal and absolute, for the Mad Doctor could tolerate no opposition, not even in thought. The Mad Doctor taunted the party as they got to their feet. "Good morning, children. Ready for nights? Or have you come to your senses and finally decided to join the winning team?" James called out to the Mad Doctor. "Can we just skip the evil fucking villain monologue and get straight to kicking your fucking ass?" Emily stepped forward, placing her arm in front of James, stopping him from advancing. She walked forward, going up the first few steps. The Mad Doctor cackled. "Yes, do approach." Connor called out in warning, "Emily, get back here." Emily spoke directly to the Mad Doctor as she ascended step after step. "You were the one who has driven my world insane. You were the one who saw to it that I was cut open as I still lived. You oversaw my mother's murder and turned my own father against me." Emily continued to ascend, listing off the Mad Doctor's sins one by one, increasing in anger with each accusation. Emily approached the top, saying, "You place no value on other life. You don't even value your own reality. You are nothing but ego and judgment, playing upon the guise of a uniter." The Mad Doctor chuckled lightly. "Ah, yes. Pain, anger, judgment. Just the energy I need to tap into." Sensing that perhaps Emily might be walking into some kind of trouble, James turned to the rest of the party. "Come on, we gotta help her." Before anyone could move, the Mad Doctor raised his mechanical right fist and started drawing energy from the golden orb behind him. A deafening sound and a deeply hurtful vibration flowed forth from the orb, hitting Emily in the center of the chest and stunning everyone else. The blast knocked Emily backward down the stairs into the ground below, where she landed on her face in the direction of the rest of the party. The Mad Doctor called out with clenched fist, "Celestial child, rise and obey as all good children do. End their lives." With the effect of the golden orb having completed itself, people were now free to move. James ran over to Emily to see if she was okay. She started to push herself up, somewhat shakily. James helped her get to her feet. With a sudden burst of action, Emily wrapped her right hand around James's throat and started to squeeze lightly, picking him up off the ground slightly as she raised her arm. Emily smiled wickedly, looking right into James's eyes as she clamped her grip down onto his windpipe. He struggled silently to pull her hand off his throat, but was completely ineffective. Connor sprang into a burst of movement, intercepting the choke, going between James and Emily, and with a twisting movement was able to free James from Emily's grasp. She looked at Connor with glowing purple eyes and straightway plunged an open fist attack into the center of Connor's chest. The palm strike cracked his ribs and sent him flying 60 feet away, bowling over Sin in the process and causing Connor to land in a tangled mass of injuries. Emily stood in horseback riding stance. With a powerful squat, she pushed a pair of black wings from her back, giving off an eerie purple glow like a blacklight. Sin reacted in panic. What are you doing?" Emily looked to Sin with a wicked smile and spoke in aggressive tones. "Teaching you the value of pain. You think Jimmy boy gave you a good fisting? Wait till I get a hold of you." Between snapping bones and coughing up blood, Connor managed to call out, Orb! Sin went into a furious dance, throwing elemental magic towards the orb, but to no avail, as some sort of force field intervened. Emily called out to Sin, "Wrong move, bitch!" After getting Sin's attention, Emily lunged forward, using the thrust of her wings to attack. She rammed her shoulder into Sin's chest before she could even react, knocking Sin back a dozen feet, sliding on the heels of her shoes before she stabilized herself. Emily went straight in again for another attack, kicking up dust and leaves with every burst of movement. Emily lunged forward with a fist attack, which Sin only narrowly avoided, but followed up with a knee strike to her abdomen, causing her to bend down from the force of the blow. Sin attempted to block and move away, only to be grabbed and put into an armbar hold. Holding Sin at length, Emily came down with an elbow strike, snapping Sin's arm at the elbow. Emily pushed Sin some distance away as she screamed out in agony, caught her by the same broken arm, then thrust two fingers into her lower spine, severing the spinal cord just above her hips. Emily then dropped her to the ground, where she writhed around in agony. Emily chuckled most wickedly, cackling like a maniac. "I could kill you all in an instant, but this is so much more fun." Connor struggled to get to his feet, with half of his bones broken, only to be seen by Emily. She put her palms together and faced them outward, channeling a beam of pure holy light directly at the center of Connor's body, engulfing him in white flame and dropping him to the ground in a twisted shriek of agony. He flailed and flopped around a bit, and then went still and silent. Sin lay paralyzed on the ground, with a compound fracture on one arm, and her spine snapped, disallowing any movement of her lower body. James got up off the ground, slowly, barely able to breathe. He could see Emily knelt down over Sin, about to deal a lethal blow to the back of Sin's head with a closed fist. James rushed forward in a speed dash to intercept, getting himself struck in the shoulder by the same blow. The blow snapped his right shoulder out of socket and sent him ragdolling over about 30 feet of ground. His head smacked into the trunk of a tree, and he was knocked unconscious. Emily stood among the defeated, making a tisk-tisk noise in utter disappointment. Emily walked menacingly over to James, giving Sin a wink and a smile on the way by. She stooped down, placing her right hand on James's chest, pouring healing energy into his body. His bones snapped into place and his body healed, returning him to consciousness. Just as James became conscious again, Emily slammed a fist into his chest, cracking a few ribs and knocking the wind out of him. He gasped and coughed, both in terror and confusion, as his first girlfriend mercilessly beat the living shit out of him with a happy smile on her cute freckled face. Emily stayed stooped next to James, speaking in a mocking tone. "So, these are Earth's best. Fucking pathetic." Connor was just rousing to consciousness, despite his body being half burnt up. He was bloody, blackened, and broken, but still not out. Emily turned to Connor, as she sensed he may be able to move again soon, and he was theoretically her most dangerous opponent among the party members. She stomped her way over to Connor, angrily shouting out, "Some people are only old because they have never learned to fucking die." "Don't worry, old man. I'll teach you." A sharp and bloody object pierced through Emily's abdomen, spilling blood over the ground. She screamed and doubled over as the pointed object was pulled out as violently as it had been thrust in. Emily stood erect again, shaking off the effects of the wound as it rapidly healed in a matter of a few seconds. She turned around to see the unicorn, Haleen, with bloodied horn. Emily glared at Haleen, shouting, "You! I'll turn you into fucking glue!" Dr. Skull bellowed from above as the defeated and helpless party watched on. "Enough! I already have what I need from you. The blood of Yeshua." The mad doctor concentrated, extending an open hand, causing Emily's blood to rise from the ground, atomize, drift toward him, and then go into his body. Emily stood, bound completely to the will of the mad doctor through the effects of the golden orb. Dr. Skull raised his arms, summoning a vast portal behind him. Beyond the portal was a set of stairs, ascending into the heavenly realms. The mad doctor gloated to the defeated party as Emily remained compliant. With Emily's body parts inside me, I possessed the flesh of God. Were there blood inside me, I possess the blood of God as well. I will ascend. I will become authority and truth. Behold, as I become your new and eternal God. The mad doctor tilted his head in amusement and spoke once more with a twisted smirk of arrogant confidence. I will leave your flesh to my children. They know what best to do with the likes of you. When the mad doctor said this, the rabble slaves and humanimals started to advance, eager to tear into flesh, whether it could offer resistance or not. Dr. Skull then turned to face Emily, speaking in a tone low, evil, and sadistic. Come, ascend the stairs with me. Become my concubine, and together we shall rule all in heavenly places. We shall create a master race of gods. The mad doctor extended his left hand to Emily, signaling her to climb the stairs on the planet, and then the stairs to the heavens. Emily walked towards the doctor as though entranced, making steady progress. Once beside the mad doctor, she extended her hand. They held hands together and started to approach the heavenly steps. As the mad Dr. Skull and captive Emily approached the stairs, a violent sound descended from the trees behind the fallen party. Branches snapped and a mighty whirring sound overhead, overwhelmed as a hawk ship descended through the trees into the temple area of the forest. It smashed through the top of the branches, piloted by Rolf Luger, with a turkey man in blue on the left wing and a turkey man in red on the right wing. The helpless but pleasantly surprised party looked on as the ship's cannons started to fire in rapid succession. Lurky on the left wing and Turkey on the right wing had both brought portable missile launchers and also took direct aim. All of the weapons fired at the wooden base of the golden orb, sending it flying into the vast portal. Being a holy artifact, it wasn't even damaged, but was sent flying back into the spiritual realm from whence it had been taken. The golden orb went flying by just as Dr. Skull and Emily were about to enter the portal. The golden orb passing into the portal released Emily from the effects. Dr. Skull clamped down his grip on Emily's hand in an attempt to drag her with him. She pulled back but found herself being dragged along as his physical strength exceeded hers. With a quick maneuver, Emily freed herself from the mad doctor's grip as his wings reverted back to gold. She pulled back, but found herself being dragged along as his physical strength exceeded hers. With a quick maneuver, Emily freed herself from the mad doctor's grips as her wings reverted back to gold from the black that they had been previously. The hawk ship and turkeys turned their aim to the mad doctor as Emily leapt out of the way of incoming projectiles in an action coordinated by the subtext of the situation. On any battlefield, hit the enemy and stay out of the line of fire are prime directives. The multiplicity of cannon fire and projectiles ran into the force field surrounding the mad doctor, doing no damage or having any effect at all. The mad doctor lifted up his arms, aiming his two wrist cannons directly at the hawk ship. He drew up power and accumulated it before sending forth an enormous blast of energy, striking the ship, damaging its engines, and sending it careening to the ground. The turkey man managed to leap off the wings, but Rolf had to endure the impact of a crash as the vessel came crashing down. Emily stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking up to the mad doctor. She raised her right hand as though she were holding up a ball, and then snapped her fingers. The turkey man managed to fire off a second set of rockets at the mad doctor. The mad doctor expected his force field to intervene, but it fizzled just as the rockets approached, striking him with a pair of mighty explosions. The force of the explosions pushed him onto one knee with a grunt. Dr. Skull barked out at the now defiant Emily. "What the fuck was that?" Emily answered with a stoic expression. "You touched my hand, stupid. I can do anything you can do, so I turned off your force field." The mad doctor called out to his cohorts, only to find them all scattered about unconscious. He grunted again, seeing that Emily had also severed his local connection to his forces, rendering them all inert. Dr. Skull chuckled, being moderately impressed, but then turned his tone to something more threatening. Yeah, indeed. You wield celestial power, and the nanites in your body allow you technological prowess. But even that will not allow you to be as I am. Emily embraced Haleen, the celestial unicorn, as she came close to with a tear in her eye. Emily touched the tear and shed one herself with bowed head. Clouds gathered quickly and it began to rain, but only on her and the nearby party members. The rain contained regenerative properties and caused anyone upon whom it fell to gain minor regeneration. James, Sin, and Connor started to heal and were roused to standing on their feet. Emily looked up to Dr. Skull and spoke calmly but with conviction. Perhaps not, but I didn't come alone. You send your constructs, one after another. You're willing to kill but unwilling to die. For that reason alone, you can never be a god. Dr. Skull chuckled with the type of scorn that would make anyone feel small. Celestial you are, but equal you are not. It's time you learned about scale. An immense golden light saturated the area, blinding everyone. The ground quaked, the sky turned red, the distant moons turned black, and the sun became eclipsed by a vast shadow. Flames erupted around the temple buildings, and the moans of the suffering dead resonated from their personal self-made hells. Tortured spirits danced in elliptical orbits around angels bound with shackles made of belief. The entire area became awash in the heaviness of unheard prayers, unfulfilled wishes, and unrequited loves. A dauntless hopelessness pervaded the area as the mad doctor accumulated the remains of his soldiers and machinations around him to his own form. The flesh was torn apart and reformed as sinew. Twisted metal and broken trees accumulated into armor, becoming cannons, guns, and thick plates. The mad doctor became a mechanical and biological construct filled with spiritual power. Enormous metallic wings shot from his back, each lined with more than 100 cannons and gun barrels. The joints articulated around metallic skulls whose eyes glowed red or purple, depending upon location. Purple for the limbs and red for the wings. His stature increased threefold, becoming 30 feet tall and 4 times as wide. His new posture stood with a low center of gravity, endless machinations, and powerful wings. Orbiting around him in multiple patterns are numerous eyes, all sprouting tentacles. The mad doctor's breath became as the rushing of the wind, and each movement groaned like a train sliding to a halt. The construct was complete power and evil. Lines intersected across the strong and daunting physical figure, creating a wireframe of mystical energy, adding dimension and spiritual form to the material construct. In the spirit energy wireframe, where the physical form was the right angles, all the wireframes followed an arc, bringing even symmetry to a form both carnal and divine, twisted by the dark desire for power and control. With spiritual armor and knowledge coming into play over the vast prowess of the construct, the mad Dr. Skull manifested unto himself the powers of war and judgment, becoming their virtual avatar, a cybernetic celestial demigod. Just as the carnal, pseudo-psycho-spiritual construct of doom and gloom demigod demagoguery was fully forming to flaunt force upon the friendly forces of freedom from fuckery, the free fall of rain from the fearful foal flawed flawlessly down, fixing flesh and fostering focus among the fearless few left to fight the ferocious fucknuttery of the most fearsome foe ever fucking fought. Despite the party's healing injuries and rejuvenated strength, an overwhelming sense of fear and hopelessness pervaded. The construct of judgment struck terror and guilt into everyone who beheld it. Every failing, every sin, every purposeful offense came directly to mind. The immense sense of personal guilt was paralyzing. All who looked upon the construct of judgment were fast frozen with a fuck-ton of frivolous feelings of failure. Grasped by guilt, frozen by fear of failure, feeling gutlessly guilty, none could lift an arm to fight, save for the undead elven celestial vampire, Connor Greenleaf, whose brain was based only on flawed feelings of fear and frustration. His long practiced meditative focus allowed him to disregard nearly all emotion, as he had been chemically altered as a youth to feel only sadness, anger, and guilt. Even Emily was unable to move in any way as party members started to fall down, collapsing into grief and hopelessness. The mad construct gloated in the helplessness of its rivals, standing upright and flexing to look even larger, raising a monstrous small car-sized fist into the air with the intention of crushing Emily's physical form. The mad construct brought its fist down to crush Emily, who was snatched out of the way just in time as Connor mustered the intent to move and did so. He rolled over a few times and landed in a stoop next to Emily, who had dropped again onto one knee. Rolf and the two turkey men were some distance away from the effect, crawling out of the wreckage of the damaged hawk ship. Rolf looked to Lurky and Jerky and called out quietly but forcefully, "Help me with the BMFG, guys!" The turkey sprang into action to help Rolf unload the BMFG, going to the wrecked hawk ship's cargo compartment to retrieve the nearly 10-foot-long weapon. The locks were damaged and wouldn't move, so Lurky used his spirit sword and Jerky used his arm cannon neutron shot to destroy the two locks. While Rolf and the turkey men were unloading the large weapon, Connor was being kept busy by an increasing number of attacks from the mad construct, having fully distracted it from Emily. Rolf, Lurky, and Jerky scrambled to assemble a weapon salvaged from wreckage on the Red Moon by a straggler whose ship went off course at first due to a navigation error. It was a guided anti-proton interferometric waveform discriminating turret gun, a highly experimental and barely tested weapon system, supposedly capable of using the sum of its own energy output to directly antipolarize an equal amount of energy and pattern struck. A gun to which there can theoretically be no defense, as it would theoretically stop any energy patterns present, reducing them to null, with all inertia redistributed as localized heat, as no energy or matter can be truly destroyed. Rolf, Lurky, and Jerky worked together to quickly set up the 800-pound weapon system, rolling out on 4 caster wheels. The mad construct fully spread its wings, spanning 400 feet in either direction, rising far above the tree line as shoulder pauldrons shifted into place to aim the mounted cannons. Hundreds of wing barrels pointed straight up to deliver mortar-style attacks, while individual cannons selected specific targets. The final segment of the guided anti-proton interferometric waveform discriminating turret gun was being clanked and ratcheted into position by the turkeys, just in time for Rolf to slide back the very mechanical and analog power switch. Jerky looked to Rolf to ask a question as the BMFG powered up, making a high-pitched whirring sound along with a deep hum. "Say, what is a BMFG anyways?" Rolf locked the gun's mechanisms onto the looming threat ahead and said, "Big motherfucking gun." Lurky quietly mused out loud, "Ah." As the mad construct powered up to cover the entirety of the area in a deadly barrage of fire, the rest of Lurky's sentence went unheard because the big motherfucking gun roared to life. The turret started to rotate faster and faster, topping out at 100,000 RPMs, able to deliver 1,666 bursts per second in any direction it could be pointed. The mad construct was just about to unleash its vast volley when the big motherfucking gun began firing. Glowing hot red and pink bursts of anti-energy at an insane 1,666 bursts per second while aimed directly at center mass of the mad construct. The intensely bright volley lit up the entire area in pinkish light. Those near the cannon could feel some heat output as what seemed like a solid stream of fire was spewed most violently in the direction of the mad construct, initially pushing the cannon back about 3 feet, despite both turkeys trying to stop it from rolling. The barrage of bursts proceeding from the big motherfucking gun were being dissipated into the force field around the mad construct. The energy-robbing force of the burst served to continually reduce the surface area of the force field being struck, pushing it inward as it disintegrated. Nonetheless, the violent assault on the force field served to stagger the mad construct. The collapse of the force field and the accumulating heat resulted in an explosion in a power conduit in the mad construct's upper left quadrant, rendering its left side shoulder pauldron mechanisms inoperable. disabling the related weaponry. The interconnected nature of the holistically designed construct meant that any part of it could transform and could perform any function of energy transference, but the cost would be the damage would be spread across the entire system. For this reason, the entire firing mechanism was interrupted, delaying the myriad turrets from firing for a moment. The resulting backdraft and negative energy also disrupted the psycho-spiritual effects of the pervasive area assault, nullifying the spiritual effects. After the explosion, Emily, Sin, and James became able to concentrate again and could now act on their own. As they were snapping out of their previously so sorry state, the mad construct was reactivating its weaponry, and the big motherfucking gun was experiencing a malfunction, likely from the heat it produces. Emily came out of her trance saying, "Ah, what the hell? I couldn't even think." James held his head. "Too much emotion." Connor spoke sternly. "We still have a threat." With the BMFG malfunctioning, as Sin came out of her trance, she started to unleash a barrage of martial moves, air punches, targetless chops, foot flicks, and axe kicks, thrust into dead space, with the very real effect of creating elemental effects in the material plane. With a 4-move combo, a block and a tangle-style move created a wave of water that splashed forth violently with the force of a tsunami. A straight fist strike sent a bolt of electrical energy in a straight line to be conducted over the remaining water. An axe kick brought down on an immense burst of flame wrapped around the molten rock. Then a palms-up double chop brought about 2 spikes of stone erupting from the floor to puncture the heated metal. The tsunami strike hit the mad construct violently, lowering it to one knee. The burst of lightning from the shock thrust frazzled every circuit, causing the construct to convulse under electrocution. The fire chop kick smashed the construct over the head and shoulders with a molten boulder, superheating its accumulated armor of wood and sinew wrapped in mech parts. A violent upthrust of stone caltrops struck the superheated armor, taking out a section of it, going from the cross to the lower chest in a straight line going up. The gash was about a foot wide and went down to the original armor layer, causing some damage to the systems underneath, which redistributed itself across the whole unit, meaning damage everywhere, but far less of it. While Sin was doing that, Connor Greenleaf turned to his starlight blade, removing it from his waist-mounted sheath and holding his great sword high above his head. He concentrated on the rune on the side of the sword as its presence caused the area to fall under moonlight, despite it being day, and despite the distorting effects of the mad construct. The starlight sword, being pointed towards the sky, fanned out to both sides, producing multiple copies of itself, 44 to either side, producing 88 separate projections of itself. Upon the command word, "Loose!" they shot up into the air and came down in multiple arcs over the intended target. The blade struck the mad construct over the head, shoulders, back, and upper body, smashing out chunks of the accumulated armor. Each blade shattered into tiny pieces upon striking their marks. Each exploding blade induced burst of extreme cold, causing the affected area to become even more brittle. With Sin throwing deluges of magic and Connor dropping shattering blades, James used his immense speed to run up to an area just in front of the mad construct, which was beginning to stomp forward. James ran around in circles so fast that he carved a 10-foot hole into the stone platform within just a few seconds, scuffing along the cleat-like carbotanium traction bars in his specially made running shoes. Just as his loop was finishing, he ran full blast into the side of the mad construct's opposite foot, striking it with a drop kick at over 8,000 miles per hour. James was able to make this strike without taking much damage because the gravitational integrity of his cells increased with speed, making him extremely tough at higher velocities. The impact damaged the mad construct's left foot and caused it to trip forward, landing on its right knee into the hole in the stone, then falling forward, being stopped over only by putting its hands out to absorb the impact. While Sin, Connor, and James concentrated their attacks on the mad construct, Emily used the time to use one of her newly inherited powers. Squatting down with fists clenched, she stood as though lifting something heavy with her legs. At the end of the arc of standing, she thrusted her fist toward the new moonlit sky. Shortly after, there was a visual effect similar to being inside a glass dome, with milk being poured over it as a bright white energy cascaded over the area, accompanied by a reverberating resonance that transitioned from a medium octave down to a very low one with a vibrating hum. The effect of invoking the power was that each party member was now covered in a psychokinetic shield, which would ward off any forced mental or emotional effects. Every party member received a glowing white aura in addition to the effects. Despite being knocked to one knee and on its hands, the mad construct was able to push itself up with its arms. On one knee, it was able to execute usage of its wing and shoulder guns. 144 cannons launched mortars into the air, with arcs expected to land all over the battlefield around itself. Seeing the mad construct launch the hundreds of mortars, James went into a chronometric sprint, literally running circles around his party in an area of effect, excluding the enemy. Doing this with a high degree of concentration allowed James to share his chronometric power with his teammates for so long as he could maintain his concentration. A whirlwind started to form around the party, providing the potential for interference with the incoming projectiles. Because they all received James's chronometric ability, they became able to deftly dodge the incoming explosions. For them, it was as though the attack were playing out in slow motion. James was able to access his power because Emily's psycho-emotional shield also provided her allies with temporarily extended psycho-spiritual capacities. This would again last as long as the other effects. James's allies were able to dodge the incoming mortars with their enhanced speed and perception. The mad construct was also able to fire off most of its cannons, spewing projectiles on multiple trajectories in the area of its enemies. However, the sheer forces of the encircling tornado was enough to ward off the effects of most of the projectiles. No injuries were taken. Lurky and Jerky called out from the trail, "Got it!" James knew what this meant, having seen their arrival but not having time to mention it. With this knowledge, he decided to stop running, canceling the whirlwind between the big motherfucking gun and the mad construct. The BMFG fired up a gun, being aimed at center mass of the now upright mad construct. The big motherfucking gun again screamed to life, drowning out every other sound around it. The superheated anti-energy came in like sideways rain, spun from a tornado, tearing apart sections of the mad construct's accumulated armor and reducing the cohesiveness of the energy field struck. A massive ball of heat and disruptive anti-protons, about the size of a small truck, started to accumulate at the immediate center of the mass of the mad construct. In a brilliant flash of white and purple, the accumulated cluster exploded, rending the remaining accumulated armor fragments, also causing a shockwave that knocked everyone off their feet. When the flash and the concussive forces diminished, the party was left with minor abrasions and a whole new set of problems. The mad construct now floated about 20 feet in the air, with none of the accumulated armor remaining. With the physical armor negated, it instead took on spirit armor and the resulting abilities. The lines in the wireframe became filled with a translucent light. The saints and angels vanished from the construct, replaced instead by jeering and heckling crowds. A great crown appeared on top of the construct's dual-horned head, and shackles with long chains formed around the ankles and wrist. The chains descended into a vast, hellish chasm forming under the levitating form of the construct. The visages of books, laws, writings, and all things meant to rule and judge came forth from the bowels of the chasm, dripping in blood and glowing with scorn. The vast sum of judgment was made manifest upon the sacred grounds of the sacred spirit forest. The full weight of law, judgment, and condemnation now came to bear in the form of the mad construct's paradigm of existence. None who stood in front of it could escape the light of judgment. The mad doctor himself floated somewhere in the middle of the nexus of spiritual being, obscured by the haze of the swirling fields of energy. The big motherfucking gun had again ground to a halt, this time jammed up and totally inoperable. Struck by the force of the explosion, it fell over with a loud thunk and was in a severe state of disrepair. The party scrambled to their feet to address the same foe, now with a new skin and modus operandi. The form of the enemy was now entirely ethereal and ready for spiritual warfare. Just as the party was getting to its feet and regaining its equilibrium, the spirit form of the mad construct was coming into power. A flash of deep blue washed over it from foot to head, and then red from head to foot, followed by a purple flash of light, uniting all poles in equal judgment as the light washed into a black light hue. Before any of the party could act, the wings of the now spirit-infused mad construct turned to a nearly straight upward angle as it raised its bulky fist, which seemed to be pulling something out of the ground as the construct stood erect, floating upon massive unmoving wings. Chains formed in the hands of the mad construct as it lifted upwards, causing a black, space-like void under the feet of its opposition. Just as members of the party started to see this and were about to move, gnarled chains of black steel, wrapped in barbs and thorns, emerged from the ground, encircling and entangling those near the ground. James nearly evaded capture, moving quickly, but even he succumbed to the mass of flapping and striking tentacles of chain and spewing forth from the underfoot passage to the darkest depths of the underworld. Rolf, Lurky, Jerky, James, Sin, Connor, Haleen, and even Emily were all caught up in the deluge of chains. The thorny, gnarled chains of judgment and despair wrapped around their wrists, ankles, waists, and necks, preventing any significant movement. With his now captive audience, the mad construct bellowed out in tones of judgment, guilt, condemnation, and despair. There are none who do good, for all have sinned and come short of my glory. A workman is worthy of his hire. Partake in your heavenly reward, for all of your righteousness are as filthy rags before me. You are fallen, and the wages of sin is death. Render to Caesar what is Caesar's, and render to me what is mine. Those caught in the bind struggled in futility to escape. From the dark void came many thorned, barbed, and gnarled whips, striking at and entangling those held fastly in the chains. Those wrapped in the chains saw their psychic and magical powers subdued, preventing any powers of movement or transformation. Ripping and tugging at buttons, zippers, ties, and flaps, and all manner of securing clothing, the flailing thorns tore off weapons, armor, and clothes. Gashes and cuts were left in the wake of the falling thorny whips as they removed external coverings, leaving the bodies subject to more damage. As those same thorns that stripped all to their underwear, leaving Sin nude and Emily topless, lashed out upon the naked bodies, various screams and cries ascended into the sky, reverberating among the trees and mountains in the trees, filling the local area with the sounds of many excruciating sufferings. Emily endured each lash in silence, neither speaking nor making any vocal sounds, not even a whimper, as her blood-covered body trembled in agony and shock. While Minnie looked down, her gaze was fixed upon the mad construct. The lashing thorns themselves, covered in vinegar and salt, broke through and tore away skin, leaving bloody gashes and bleeding wounds all over every body. They struggled in vain to escape, as each cat-of-nine-tails style bundle of thorns tore into each person's resolve, leaving behind with each impact the succinct feeling that it was all deserved. Psychological torture compounded upon the physical suffering, removing the desire to escape, leaving behind a sense of acquiescence to the guilt being imposed by the lashing strikes. The punishment became proof of guilt. Blood dripped onto the ground in heaping servings with every lash, causing agony and cries, until 39 lashes had been administered. There was a great pause, filled with only the sound of stifled crying, followed by the tentacle-like whips ascending upward and growing in size by about 50%. The gnarled, thorned instruments of torture came crashing down upon bare backs for the 40th blow, sundering not only the body, but also the spirit of those struck. James managed to stammer, "Can't, Haleen neighed weakly, barely able to twitch. Her fur matted with her own blood. Even the stoic characters Rolf and Connor were reduced to helpless sobbing and half-formed sentences. Jerky Turkey cried out in agony, Now I know how hentai girls feel. A pulse of pure darkness was emitted from the mouth of the mad construct, creating a moving darkness similar to when a low flying plane passes overhead. The party slipped into spiritual darkness under the shadow of the mad construct's spiritual influence. The mad construct issued a statement of condemnation. Suffer now for your sins. Take up your cross and follow me. From underneath each person, above the dark vortex, arose at first the tip of a rotten, knotty, and withered crucifix. It slid in between feet and the expanding bloody whips, going up the back of each person. The vines accommodated just enough to allow each person to be applied to a crucifix without being able to move away. Rusty nails emerged violently from underneath each wrist, and a pair of crossed over feet, penetrating the flesh and sealing each to their instrument of judgment and reward. Cries of anguish rose up the sky from all except Emily, who was again able to receive the punishment without making a sound. Her breathing quivered and her body shivered, but she spake no words and did not cry aloud, despite tears streaming down her now bloodied face. All at once, the thorned and gnarly vines were ripped away, receding back into the underworld below, causing more bloody injury as they went. The mad construct saw the work it had created and said that it was good. It watched with great joy as each subject of judgment was put onto the cross, nailed down and forced to hold an awkward upright position that only served to strain and exacerbate the nail wounds or else be unable to breathe. Again, the scenery changed dramatically and instantly as the party found themselves atop a hill overlooking a vast sea of judgmental faces, crying out, "Crucify her! Bleed him out! Whore! Sinner! Devil girl! Harlot! Liar! Heretic! Failure of a father! Bad brother! Thief! Murderer!" Any myriad other horrible accusations all cried out. The mere weight of such crushing guilt was enough to make the heart weak. Each slowly succumbed to heartbreak, made out of empathy and compassion for the very sea of faces calling out for the punishment due. James, Sin, Lurky, and Jerky were the first to lose their strength, slumping down and slipping into a state of suffocation. Within just a few minutes, they were dead. Next were Rolf and Haleen, slowly succumbing to the abandonment of hope, sliding down under weakened spirit and flesh, and losing the ability to breathe. Very soon after, Rolf and Haleen were dead as well. Although Connor had no need to breathe, he was still especially attuned to negative emotion, and his spirit was weak. Under the extreme duress of the sum of spiritual darkness, despair, and hopelessness, with no great internal love or peace to counterbalance it, his heart exploded within his very chest. He slumped down, crushed by spiritual agony. Only Emily remained. The spiritual sun was about to set. A form emerged from the millions in the jeering, heckling crowd of judgmental hypocrites. Clad in Greco-Roman military armor and a cloak that obscured the face, 7 feet tall, as muscular as an ogre, with ebony skin covered in hellish runes, each symbolizing a different way to be judged and die. He carried over his right shoulder a great and crude club, covered in barbs and thorns, stained with blood and bits of flesh. It was the solemn duty of the leg-breaker to be sure that none suffered after sunset. He paid no mind to Emily, walking past and going straight to the rear of the formation. The leg-breaker stepped in front of Jerky, raised the club into an attack stance, then swung it with all his might, smashing his legs. Smashing the legs ensured death by suffocation. The leg break went from Lurky to Jerky, and to each other person, smashing legs to ensure death. After smashing all the other legs, the leg breaker sauntered over to Emily's cross. Looking up to Emily, the leg breaker reached up with its left hand and clawed fingers, grabbing the front of its cowl and pulling it down. The leg breaker revealed that it had the head of a serpent with a flittering forked tongue to soak up all the lies of the dusty air. Emily hung, leaning forward, covered in blood and wounds. The lower half of her hair was red from the spatter. The leg breaker put on a a wicked grin and raised its gruesome club to strike at Emily's legs. The leg breaker brought down the club with its full might to crush Emily's legs. At the last moment, using all her strength, Emily tore her feet away from the solitary nail, making the entry wound larger. The gruesome club came down, striking Emily's right foot in the heel, causing a bruise. The leg breaker seemed flummoxed to have missed its mark. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Emily strained against the nails through her wrist, exerting pressure on the timber of the cruciform instrument of torture. Emily pushed her arms forward with all her strength. Rather than her arms tearing away from the nails, the board of the cross snapped near her elbows, with both remaining attached to her forearms by the nail. Now untethered, she fell forward, landing upon the blood-soaked ground on her arms and knees, just a dozen feet away from the cross. The leg breaker stomped his way over to Emily to contain the escaping prisoner of judgment. Seeing the leg breaker's long shadow fall over her, Emily rose to her bloody feet with a jumping uppercut, striking the serpent's face with the blunt of the board hanging off her right arm. She used the board attached to her left arm to strike the serpent over the top of the head as she came back down from 6 feet above. The leg breaker was staggered, but attempted to lift its club to attack. Emily launched an all-out flurry of blows, striking the leg breaker in various locations with the ends of the boards nailed to her arms. After unleashing the vicious onslaught, Emily saw the leg breaker brought down to one knee. She lifted her right foot and came down upon the serpent's head, crushing it utterly. The leg breaker let out a long and thick sigh, slowly evaporating into vapor. All at once, the spiritual dream ended, returning everyone to their physical forms in the material world, as the phantasmal dream had been ended. The others were physically dead, having endured the shock of being tortured to death, but Emily was under no such effects. She tapped into the power of the mad dream. Catching the mad construct unaware, no later than immediately after the dissipation of the mad dream, Emily leapt up with her golden wings fully extended. 8 rings orbited around her, each covered in 88 eyes. A second set of wings emerged between the original set, with one white and the other black, bursting out of her back, spewing white and black feathers from her back as the wings erupted into reality. A pair of cruciform swords materialized in either hand, bearing holy runes, untranslatable and running in circular patterns. The right sword bore the mark of the dragon, and the left bore the mark of the phoenix. The powers of heaven and hell were at her call. At the peak of her 490-foot ascension, she crossed the 2 cruciform weapons into an X, bringing white-hot light and frozen bleakness into total juxtaposition. The skies opened up, letting out rays of white-hot light. The ground underneath the mad construct bursted open, giving way to the flood of bitter cold blackness. The heavens rained down the power of the phoenix, setting the area awash in burning flames of justice and the tears of compassion for life. The rain of tears fell upon the dead, stirring them back to life, slowly regenerating from their injuries. They were no longer dead, but were unconscious and in no condition to fight. From the hells under the mad construct bubbled up the breath of dragons, all-consuming as the 4 carnal elements wore down all things constructed in mind and spirit. The heavens rained down white-hot tears. From the ground came blackened, grasping tentacles flailing about. The holy rain beat down upon the spiritual form of the mad construct. Vicious tentacles entangled and whipped away at the mad construct's form. At the meeting of the holy and egoic energies, a nexus of non-duality started to form, starting as only the size of the head of a pin. The nothing-everything nexus formed a glowing dark orb bathed in light. The center of this nexus of non-being collided with the mad construct's essential essence, overcoming the form of spirit structure wielded by the terrible mad construct. The spiritual energy of the mad construct started to dissipate, evaporating away, leaving only the physical form of the mad doctor's stolen celestial flesh and interconnecting nanites. After a gigantic flash seen everywhere in existence, Dr. Malmorte's skull's puppet was all that remained, a cybernetic marionette of the mad doctor himself. Seeing that her friends were alive but in bad shape, Emily quickly moved to intercept on their behalf. Despite being reduced to the physical form, the Mad Doctor's puppet remained whole. Dr. Skull's form dropped to the ground without the spiritual construct. Emily swooped down at speed to intercept. The Mad Doctor quickly sensed this and aimed his cannons upward, firing several volleys of immense energy projectiles, still capable of bringing her harm. A swift roll and change of trajectory allowed Emily to dodge all the incoming fire as she descended upon the Mad Doctor. She came down with both swords, narrowly missing the Mad Doctor's head, but did manage to cut off the cigar close to his filthy lips. He immediately countered with his clawed right fist, striking Emily in her left shoulder as she and her grazing blow went by. The impact caused 2 stab wounds in her shoulder and knocked her back about 20 feet as she slid upon the soles of her shoes. Looking back, Emily saw that the party was now alive, but still very much unconscious. She lifted both swords, striking at the sky. The ground opened up around the rest of the party, barring passage with holy flame, forming a circle of protection around them. With her friends safely ensconced, Emily was free to engage the Mad Doctor. While she had brought about the circle of flaming protection, the Mad Doctor charged up a shot and aimed for the center of her chest. Seeing it coming at the last moment, she crossed her wings in front of her face, intercepting the ball of lethal energy. The white and black wings became slightly singed, but the golden wings were not affected. Wasting no time, Emily charged the Mad Doctor to keep distance between him and her friends. She lashed out with her swords, attacking but being blocked and dodged by the deft moves of the Mad Doctor, who also possessed a great deal of martial skill. Emily and the Mad Doctor went back and forth, blocking and dodging each other's strikes and being blocked and dodged, seeming to be very evenly matched in martial skill. After several close blows, Emily changed her pattern and managed to strike the Mad Doctor's right arm, penetrating the armor and opening flesh. A mixture of blood and cyborg lubricant spilled to the ground, like paint being thrown at a wall. At the same time this blow landed, Emily was made to pay for it with an energy cannon blast straight to her stomach. The force of the blast knocked her onto her back, sliding across the ground with a second-degree burn. Without hesitation, she snapped to her feet, using only her core strength and deft movement, just as she learned in Jacob's classes. Emily and the Mad Doctor circled each other, walking slowly and not taking their eye off the other. The Mad Doctor extended the length of his claws to about 5 feet, so that he had now the equivalent of 2 swords as well. They went about, sizing the other up, looking for some opportunity. The Mad Doctor feinted an attack, but Emily was unmoved. He chuckled with a twisted sense of surprise and excitement to be so evenly matched. The Mad Doctor had a bloodied arm, and Emily's kimono was stained with blood and had burn and slash holes in it. Her wounds were mostly superficial and quickly healing, but the clothing remained stained with her blood. Having been through so much, she was scarcely covered, having rips and tears all over the majority of her clothes. The Mad Doctor struck out with an attack of his claws, being deflected but saw an opportunity for a headbutt as their blades crossed. The metallic tip of his visored forehead struck Emily in the nose, also slightly denting his visor. Emily backpedaled a few steps as the Mad Doctor closed in for another strike. With swift movement, Emily dropped low and lashed out with both feet in a spinning sweep maneuver, striking the Mad Doctor's feet with hers, bringing him down to the ground with a crash. Emily spun around to land an axe kick while he was down, but the Mad Doctor was able to roll out of the way and get to his feet again. Emily sprang to her feet and went rushing in at great speed, with both swords at the ready. The Mad Doctor engaged his thrusters on his boots and rocketed into the air. Emily spread her wings and leapt up, gliding upon her now 4 wings, taking the battle into the sky. Emily and the Mad Doctor could fly at very similar rates of speeds, with him able to get to higher maximum speeds, and with her able to get moving more immediately. The Mad Doctor left jet trails, while Emily split apart clouds, dissipating his trails as they clashed. They were similarly matched in the sky, flying by each other in clashes of metal on metal. In one crossover incident, Emily took a slash to her white wing, which quickly became stained red with her blood, while the Mad Doctor took a nasty gash to his lower abdomen as the two rushed by each other. They got even further away, turned about, and rushed each other at maximum speed. They collided mid-air with crossed weapons, impacting each other so hard that they both came crashing down to the ground again, right on top of the highest plateau of the forest temple. Upon impacting the ground, they both rolled in separate directions, stopping about 30 feet away from the other. The Mad Doctor, lying on his side, quickly activated a welding flame to seal up the nasty gash in his stomach armor. Emily wasted no time, still on her backside but sitting up. She threw her left sword straight at the Mad Doctor. He looked up just in time to experience the sword penetrating its left shoulder, sinking in about half the length of the blade. The Mad Doctor yelled out with a crying roar as the blade sank into his body. The Mad Doctor reached over his shoulder and violently yanked the sword out of his wound as the holy metal burned at his corrupted flesh. Emily ran forward and threw a kick and, and, and threw a kick as though the Mad Doctor's head were a football destined for the goalpost. The top of her foot struck the bottom of the Mad Doctor's jaw with such force that it lifted up into the air, ragdolling about as he came crashing back down. Despite this, he kept his grasp on the sword that had previously been thrust into his shoulder. Emily approached with all speed to thrust her own sword down onto the prone Mad Doctor, but he was able to roll out of the way just in time. The Mad Doctor quickly got to his feet, only to find himself dazzled by the blow and fell to the floor, landing on his hands. Taking a quick breath through his nose, he spat some blood out of his mouth onto the ground. A solitary metallic tooth could be seen among the blood and lubrication spilled among the floor. Emily twirled the sword around in her loose grasp and readied herself for more combat. The Mad Doctor pushed himself up and went into a ready position. Between the Lady Angel, with a little technology inside, and the Mad Machine drawing upon spiritual power, things seemed fairly evenly matched. Seeing that either of them could hack and slash all day without winning due to how quickly either could recover, they both abandoned all inhibition and brought to bear all possible aggression. They both ran at the other with a battle cry, intending maximum carnage upon the other. They collided in a fury of blows, most of which were faster than the human eye could process. Blade struck blade, and each blow was deflected or evaded as the two waged war on the other. They struck at the other harder and faster, causing the sounds of combat to echo throughout the entirety of the forest. Emily's allies could only watch through the searing flames and hope for the best result as the two cybernetic demigods poured all of their spirits and bodies into the art of mortal combat. After several moments of grunts, yells, blocks, dodges, and counters, the two got separated again and ran at the other with full force, crossing swords in a devastating charge. Upon striking the other with enough force to shatter all hope, both swords shattered into innumerable fragments, crashing into dust into their hands. Crumbling into dust in their hands. Immediately after the blinding impact, Emily closed her eyes to avoid the dust for about a fraction of a second, giving the visored Mad Doctor just enough time to sneak in an overhand blow to the center of Emily's forehead. The vicious blow slammed her to the stone-tiled floor of the plateau. Emily landed on her chest, face down, but still conscious. Stunned and shaking off the effects with a few rapid blinks, Emily purposed to get up and move, but found herself quickly besieged by the Mad Doctor. With a fierce leap, he landed on top of Emily's lower back, coming down with powerful blows from his clawed mechanical hands, stabbing into her back repeatedly. Blood splashed as the Mad Doctor cackled as he punctured Emily's body with repeated blows to her middle and upper back, striking anywhere the wings were not covering. Emily's eyes widened as thrust after thrust of the long pointed claws went into her body, penetrating kidney, liver, stomach, and lungs. The form of an angel was painted onto the ground by her multiple lacerations as they sprayed blood into the air, leaving the bloody outline of a four-winged angel on the temple floor. Rather than dying and fading like a mortal girl, Emily became entranced with violent emotion. The mad doctor brought down two blows at once in the midst of the stabbing frenzy. Upon the blades entering her body, Emily tensed up every muscle, locking the blades into place. The mad doctor attempted to pull the blades out of the holy flesh, but to no avail. With a sudden twist, Emily was able to roll away, taking the mad doctor's arms with her. Despite choking on blood and feeling half numb and half in agony, with the hair again bloodied, and despite being unable to breathe or move without agony, she grabbed onto the mad doctor's left pauldron, using the leverage to twist herself around, pulling the very gauntlets off of the mad construct's hands, with a total of 6 blades still buried in her body. With the 6 blades still deep in her body, she managed to hold on to the pauldron and lifted her legs up, wrapping her thighs around the mad doctor's face. Holding on tight with her legs, she let go of the pauldron and allowed herself to fall backward till her hands touched the ground. Using all of her core strength, she doubled over, bringing the mad doctor's head down to the ground with a tremendous crash, leaving a small impact crater in the now cracked tile surface. The impact of landing on top of his head with full force of Emily's weight and strength behind it sent shockwaves through the mad doctor's body, stunning and dazing him for several moments as he lay on his back, breathless, staring up at the noontime sun. Emily rolled several feet away after the impact, coughing up and spitting out blood. Her mouth, nose, hair, and back ran red with her own blood as the wounds in her body closed up due to her regenerative powers. She reached around to her back and managed to pull the claws out of her body, let them drop to the floor with several metallic clunks. Still, having been without oxygen and exerting herself, she lost consciousness for a brief moment, laying on her side. An eye popped open when she heard a whirring sound coming from the mad doctor's cybernetic body. Regenerative systems were engaging, repairing the damage and resupplying energy. After a moment, the mad doctor was able to move again and started to rise to his feet. Now conscious again, Emily did the same, also feeling very shaky due to the accumulated injuries and massive blood loss. Both slowly arose to their feet, still willing to go on. Emily was willing to die to save lives, and Dr. Malmuerte's skull was willing to kill to attain power, the most powerful drives in mortal consciousness. Both combatants retained their strength and speed, but their reflexes suffered due to the tremendous injuries and energy spent. The fight turned into a slog, with both persons landing thudding blows with little thought of defense. Emily attempted to grab hold of the mad doctor's blows to tie him up or slow him down, but the blows dealt were too vicious to be tied up that way. The mad doctor landed each blow with murderous intent, intensifying in aggression with every strike as his systems repaired themselves. Emily's wounds would have to close before the blood could be regenerated, and so she had to fight in comparatively weakened state. Emily landed a fist into the mad doctor's face, knocking him back a foot. Leaning forward, he thrust a tremendous uppercut into Emily's stomach, lifting her feet off the ground, then continued to pound her body, knocking the wind out of her and breaking a couple of her ribs in the process. Not yielding, Emily managed to put up a cross block, deflecting most of the incoming blows, but the defensive posture left little room for countering. Emily attempted another grapple, but couldn't get a hold on any of the incoming strikes. Emily found herself doubled over by a massive knee thrust, going straight into her esophagus. The mad doctor grabbed Emily by her bloodied hair with his left hand, actually holding her up as she was about to slump over. The mad doctor drew back his right fist and struck Emily square in the center of the face, then repeated this 4 more times before losing grip on her slippery, bloody hair. Emily landed on the floor, laying on her back, prone and barely able to move. She could not see through the bloodied eyes, and the sound of her ears ringing drowned out all other sounds. She could smell only the iron of her own blood, and her body was numb from the constant thrashing. She had only taste and smell to guide her. Emily felt the sensation of impact on her abdomen as the mad doctor straddled her body, sitting on top of her. She attempted to lift her hips and wiggle free, but her strength was greatly diminished. So long as the mad doctor kept inflicting new wounds, she could not keep enough blood in her system to retain her full strength. A sharp impact struck Emily's left cheek, then her right, as the mad doctor rained down blow after blow with his metallic fist of ionized carbotanium. She raised her hands to defend, but could only stop every other blow from striking her, as her face was mercilessly beaten. The mad doctor cackled devilishly as he beat Emily with profound hatred, taunting and jeering. "You think to question my power? Foolish little imp of a child! Just who the fuck do you think you are?" Numb, in terror, and fading fast, Emily managed to call out in a whimper, "Daddy, I... daughter." The sky split open, and an all-encompassing light came down from the heavens. There was a mighty rushing of wind like the roar of a turbulent ocean. The mad doctor was struck by a brilliant and blinding light, losing all vision. The mad doctor rolled off of Emily, falling limp as though dead. Emily blinked several times in the presence of the all-encompassing light. Through blurred vision, which started to slowly clear up, she saw the visage of the perfect being before her. He was dressed in a gleaming white robe, which reached down to his feet, and with a golden sash around his chest. The hair on his head was white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like a blazing fire. Her feet were like bronze, glowing in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of rushing waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars, and coming out of his mouth was a sharp, double-edged sword. His face was bright like the sun, shining in all of its brilliance. On his right side was Emily's Earth Mother, and on his left was Jacob Bastian, her truest mentor in her life. Yeshua spoke in a booming voice, like the crashing of many thunders. "This is my daughter, in whom I am well pleased." The mad doctor was struck limp, and could only look on in impotence. Yeshua spoke with gentleness, power, and compassion, as he looked at Emily's broken body on the temple floor, and said, "You are not falling. You are simply heading in a new direction. Arise and fear not, for I am with you." Yeshua lifted his hand, and from it came a platinum light that enveloped Emily, and wrapping her on all sides. She was lifted from the bloody floor, being filled with the golden light. Her injuries receded, her blood replenished, and her bones were reset. Her skin, clothes, and all 4 wings shone as though gold while she hovered, upright, standing just 6 inches above the bloody floor. Emily was all at once fully renewed and encouraged by her father's love. Yeshua spoke once more, saying, "Your father sees your sacrifice. This day you will be with me in paradise." Yeshua then vanished as quickly as he had appeared, leaving the mad doctor to contend with Emily, now fully recharged. With the light gone, the mad doctor regained control of his body and was able to stand, again ready to do battle with Emily once again. Emily was standing upon the ground again, but was still aglow with golden light. The mad doctor thought nothing of the encounter, being even more enraged and fully committed to finishing what he had started. He switched his systems from visual interphasic to sonic, gaining some semblance of vision by sonar. The mad doctor started by firing off a volley of hostile energy. Emily raised an open palm, creating a barrier that stopped all incoming shots. Seeing his energy weapons rendered ineffective, the mad doctor charged forward to Emily again to engage in physical combat. As the mad doctor closed in with a wild swing of his right fist, Emily recalled something Jacob had once told her. He had said, "You already know what to do once you get a hold of your opponent. It's establishing that grip to begin with that you still need to practice with." Remembering this, Emily made an effort to step clear out of the way, using all of her might to get some distance from her attacker. Emily emerged some 60 feet away from the Mad Doctor as she used fleetness to evade his incoming attack that struck nothing but air. In a huff of frustration, the Mad Doctor charged in again, only to get the same result. Upon dodging a charging strike for the third time, Emily had enough distance and reaction time to summon a spell she had learned from touching Connor Greenleaf. Uttering the words and performing the somatic gesture, Emily manifested a 6-foot length of magical chain. Doing this delayed her reactions just enough for the Mad Doctor to come in with a tremendous blow that struck Emily across the jaw, knocking her back several feet, sliding on her heels. She remained on her feet, and although the blow was painful and caused injury to her now bleeding lower lip, she kept her stance and waited for the right opportunity. The Mad Doctor moved in to follow up, leaving himself wide open as he attacked with casual overconfidence. This time the Mad Doctor came rushing in with his left fist, but quickly found a chain wrapped around his arm. He yanked on the chain to draw Emily in, expecting to be able to drive his right fist into her throat with a well-aimed strike, but again found a length of chain wrapping around his arm. Emily pulled back on the chain, forcing the Mad Doctor's hands together, binding him up from making fist strikes. The Doctor attempted to twist his way out of the chains, only to be instantly yanked straight toward Emily, who thrust her foot full force into his face, shattering the mechanical visor. The blow staggered him, leaving him off balance just long enough for Emily to whip around and wrap the chain around the Mad Doctor's neck. Emily managed to maneuver behind him and pulled back on the chain with all of her strength, using her extended foot as leverage to pull against, crushing the Mad Doctor's throat with the pressure to the chain. Emily held fast to the chain with her foot still firmly planted against the Mad Doctor's back. As she slowly choked him, she wrapped the chain around her arms with a swift maneuver, and then again, pulling the Mad Doctor closer with each twist. With the choking Mad Doctor within arm's reach, she kept her left arm wrapped up in the chain while she extended her right hand to reach around and touch his forehead. With the choking Doctor fully entangled, and with her right palm fully against his head, Emily channeled all of her inner light into one massive burst of holy energy. Emily let out a loud battle scream as the massive surge of energy went into the Mad Doctor's body. The Mad Doctor would have let out a scream of agony if his throat wasn't fully collapsed, as the holy light went into his corrupt avatar of power, control, authority, and cruelty. A blazing beam of light shot out of the Mad Doctor's muted mouth as the white-hot light coursed through his body, burning up every nanite and immolating every cell in his body. Emily released the chain and kicked the Mad Doctor away as he fell face first to the floor with the white-hot light pouring out of his mouth and eyes. He managed a single but lengthy scream of agony as the cells in his body were vaporized, leaving little more than a few burnt-up mechanical parts and a pile of glowing embers and ash. With the golden light having gone through the Mad Doctor, Emily's appearance returned to normal, complete with all the holes and bloodstains. Having expended such energy, Emily burned up every nanite in her own body. Weakened and exhausted, she fell to the floor, victorious but unconscious. Her wings receded back into her body as she lay motionless in torn-up, blood-stained clothes, healed with only the bleeding lip, but completely tapped out of energy and without nanites to keep her abilities active. James was the first to awaken. Sitting up suddenly, he saw that the others were moving about too. Satisfied that they were all right, he looked all around for Emily but didn't see her. Feeling panic, James called out, "Emily, where are you?" Connor got to his feet and quickly moved to his daughter, Sin, to check on her. He helped Sin to her feet while looking back to see that Rolf, Haleen, and the turkey men were still in one piece too. As the party started to put itself back together, Sin joined James in calling out to and looking for Emily. Connor cast a spell to look above the area with a bird's-eye view and started to scan about. He quickly spotted Emily laying on top of the large set of steps leading to the plateau. Connor called out, pointing to the steps, "Up there!" Everyone ran to the steps and swiftly climbed to see what had become of Emily. Seeing her, they assumed her dead, covered in and surrounded by blood. However, in the stillness of the forest and evening, Connor could hear her shallow breaths. while Sin kept her hands over her mouth to contain a reaction that may have come out as a scream, and James looked on in horror. Connor spoke in an assuring way, as much as could be possible for him. She lives. James scurried over to Emily, half running and half crawling as he stumbled all over himself to get to her. He arrived to find her in torn up, blood-stained clothes, with blood in her hair, laying face down in a pool of her blood. The others stood back as James knelt down and attended to Emily. He gently turned her onto her back and put his ear to her chest. Having heard a heartbeat, James lifted his head with a sigh of relief, with one side of his face coated in Emily's blood. James propped Emily up, holding her close with his arms gently wrapped around her. James spoke softly, very gently, shaking her shoulders as he held her up. "Hey, come on, wake up." Emily stirred a bit, but could barely utter a most gentle response, saying, "I'm okay." Being completely exhausted, Emily lost consciousness again, resting safely in James's arms. The tender moment was interrupted by the appearance of a vast number of spirits, circling the group round about. Sin looked up to see them and let out a shrill scream. The others, except for James, looked up to Sin to see what was wrong. Sin pointed with her right hand away from the party. The others looked out to see a vast assembly of spirits around them, man, woman, and beast alike. They didn't seem to be hostile, just standing there, looking happy and relieved. James kissed Emily's forehead before looking up to see what else was going on that had everyone else stunned. James exclaimed softly, "Whoa, who are they?" A vastly larger spirit than the others stepped forward through the crowd. He was a tall and muscular humanoid with antlers like that of an elk. He was draped in furs and seemed to be some kind of wild hunter, with a bow slung over his back. The spirit spoke to the party in a gentle but echoing voice. "We are at last free from the vile construct that was using our energy for the purpose of war. But there is still one far greater, trapped within the void. Unless that spirit is freed and the taskmaster defeated, your efforts will have been for naught." James looked at the large spirit and called out, "What of Emily?" The spirit cast its gaze upon Emily for a moment, then spoke with clarity. "The machines inside her have broken. She is now as humans are, but her spirit is now very strong. She is ready." Sin questioned with concern, "Ready? For what?" From the great swell of spirits in the forest emerged a familiar figure, bathed in a golden light. It was the spirit of Michael Joseph Smith, a solar consciousness bathed in golden light. Michael spoke with calm assuredness. "When she awakes, she will be ready to enter the gate of madness with her 4 guides." James barked out angrily at Michael. "Ready? She's covered in blood and can't wake up, and you want her to do more? Isn't this enough?" Michael was moved with compassion and walked silently to where James and Emily were. James looked confused as the golden spirit of Michael knelt down to attend to Emily. James protested, "What do you think you're doing?" Michael answered softly, "Please, allow us to heal her." James let out a sigh, saying, "You better know what you're doing." Michael knelt down, extending his open right hand and placing it onto Emily's forehead and looking up. And he called out to the forest spirits, "Great spirits of the forest, heed my call and come to the aid of this brave girl, one who is willing to face death to save people she doesn't even know. Join me in mending her broken body." Even more spirits emerged from the forest, animals, unicorns, fairies, nymphs, and one very familiar to both Connor and Sin, as the spirit of Sin's mother emerged from the great swell of voices, who started to lift up a gentle song of healing, sung like a lullaby. The language of the song was indiscernible to all but James, who heard the words of the prophecy sung in a gentle and maternal way. Every spirit in the forest joined in gentle and beautiful song. As the spirit sang the song of the prophecy, gentle streams of translucent white light started to appear in the air around Emily. The voices of the dead all joined together in song. The song expanded beyond the forest. More and more spirits sang together, expanding the effect further and further out. In every corner of the universe, spirits materialized to sing the words of the prophecy. There had never been before any event like this in all of history, as every civilization known and unknown experienced the appearance of these singing spirits. Every soul lost to pointless wars, every spirit who died of illness, every being murdered, every saint, every martyr joined together in song, filling the entirety of the universe with gentle music. The strands of light surrounding Emily coalesced and joined together, intertwining and becoming cords of energy, flowing to, fro, and around her. The threads joined together until a massive orb of white light filled the area. The entire planet became awash in a great soft white light, permeating every part of the area, then all at once rushing into Emily's body, causing her to glow a pale blue color as the gentle energies washed over her broken body. The light gently washed over Emily as the maternal song filled the air. The visage of the faces of Vanana and Marduk could be seen as an ethereal form in the sky above. Their faces each shed a single tear, which fell upon the heavens, coalescing as one, and falling upon the land as a gentle rain under a pale blue sky. There was a flash of pure light, followed by the sound of gentle wind and wind chimes, echoing throughout the air as the love of the universe attended to Emily's body and spirit. Every broken cell was repaired, every injury healed without a trace, and her body was restructured to survive without the help of the nanites. All at once, all the spirits, the song, the rain, and wind all stopped, leaving everyone awestruck and unable to think, let alone speak. An eternity seemed to pass within the silence until Emily gasped, taking in a deep breath, opening her eyes and recovering her health. She looked up to James with a soft smile as she took a few deep breaths. Emily spoke softly. I was having the most amazing dream. James answered just as softly. A dream? Emily answered. Yeah, I dreamed the whole universe was singing together. All of the other spirits had vanished, but Michael remained in his golden form. Michael looked down to Emily with warmth, saying, It was. Emily looked up to see Michael's spirit and sat up to get onto her feet. James helped her as she stood, smiling smiling at Michael, then looking to see the others still alive. Emily was filled with relief. James reached out with his sleeve to help wipe the blood off Emily's face. She was healed, but absolutely coated in her own blood. Connor approached with the others in tow and stepped forward, saying, Allow me. Connor said some words, moved his hands and made a wiping motion, and cast a spell to assist Emily. A faint blue energy washed down over her, removing the blood and dirt and repairing her tattered clothing. Emily was relieved to no longer be coated in grime and half naked, and kindly thanked Connor for his spell. Jerky spoke up from behind everyone else as he stepped forward. Well, I totally have no idea what's going on anymore, but I'm glad you're okay. James looked down to the floor and noticed some markings on top of the plateau. The writing was in an ancient and dead language, and the writing said, The Altar of Blood. James spoke in wonder. Wow, Altar of Blood? Michael spoke. She has shed more than enough. We are ready. Sin called out, sounding concerned. Ready for what? Emily turned to Sin, speaking gently but resolutely. You know what we must do. Sin's joy collapsed. So, that's it? There's no other way? Emily answered. There is no other way. Rolf caught up to everyone else, but was still a bit in the dark, and so asked, Hey, sorry to be out of the loop, but what? Emily knew that Rolf wasn't fully aware of the situation, but had good intent. She looked to Rolf and spoke with gentleness and clarity. Myself and my 4 guides, we go through the gate of madness to free the imprisoned entity in the spirit world, while the remaining matic forces bear down on the broadcast tower on the planet, so that this can never happen again. Rolf questioned calmly, but with skepticism. There is something you're not telling us. James blurted out, holding back his own feeling. Doing that will kill her. Lurky spoke up in an abject horror. You're sending a 15-year-old girl on a suicide mission? Emily answered with gentleness again. It's not that simple. Sin looked angrily to Emily, saying, Simplify it. Emily looked on to the blood-spattered floor for a moment before giving a response, looking back up to everyone, meeting each one's gaze one by one as she spoke. She said, Neither destroying the tower nor winning the spiritual battle will kill me. It's restoring the lost lives that requires that. James reached out to Emily, nearly spinning her in place to directly address her. What? What are you saying? You don't have to die, but you will? Emily avoided James' angry stare as she looked to Mikhail. James got a bit more upset, getting a bit louder. Why are you avoiding the question? Mikhail moved closer to James and Emily, and after a short pause, he further elucidated the situation. Emily wasn't sent to us to stop the mad doctor and rescue the trapped souls. She was sent to also restore the lives lost in the process, completely undoing all of the mad doctor's machinations. Emily looked to James, putting her right hand on James's shoulder in a comforting way, saying, I am to restore the lost years the locusts have devoured, and restoring all those lives requires sacrifice. That's why I came back, not just for you or them, as for everyone lost in this pointless tragedy. James inquired all the more, with earnest concern. What about the suffering caused by your loss? You expect us all to go on, as though nothing happened? Emily shed a single tear, as she answered, Of course not. You think I'd kill myself if there was a better way? Sin spoke up in subdued protest. It isn't fair. Why you? James protested as well. Yeah, why does it have to be you? James's tone escalated even more angrily. Yeah, why not Emo Girl or Skullface over there, huh? What's wrong with them? Emily answered with softness but increased conviction. I am of the line of sacrifice. It is my calling to die for others. It always was. My previous death was not only the result of the evil doctor's machinations, but it's also the opportunity I needed to accept my calling. Emily turned to James and spoke with both conviction and sorrow. I love you, James, but I can't stay. We knew that going in. That's why I gave myself to you. There is no happily ever after. I do this and there's even more suffering. You have to let me go. James looked through teary eyes with hurt. I don't want you to go. To hell with everyone else. What about you? Your entire life amounts to suffering and sacrifice. That just doesn't seem fair. It isn't. Emily pulled James closer to her as he stood there angry with crossed arms, and spoke to James with her hands on the outside of his shoulders and tears in her own eyes, and spoke with a broken voice. James, the only boy I ever loved. Listen well and understand. James pulled himself together some to listen to Emily speak, uncrossing his arms and stepping forward to rest his chin on her left shoulder, standing cheek to cheek with her. Emily embraced James for a moment, squeezing him tight for a moment, then stepped back to finish speaking. James, human existence is rife with sacrifice and suffering, but that doesn't make it meaningless. Emily then leaned forward and pressed her lips to James, sharing in a gentle, long, and slow kiss. Both knew it would be the last and didn't want the moment to end. Coming up for air, they leaned into a mutual embrace and remained in silence for several moments. After a long embrace, Emily stepped back and looked to the others who were waiting patiently, only half understanding what was happening. James spoke to Emily in a slight stammer. I love you. Emily put on a comforting smile through wet eyes and turned to face the others. Emily shared a moment of eye contact with each person there in mutual silence before moving forward with their mission. Emily then looked to Mikhail and said with confidence, I'm ready.